win over the Brewers today in the playoffs, right? That's what y'all want to talk.
Is that Braves? Is that like that's like a hockey thing, right?
It is a hockey thing. So okay. Looks like we got some people waiting. Let's see. It should show up here in a second. Just want to confirm because I don't see it yet. Okay. Okay. I see it. We're live. We're live. All right. Obviously, we're going to talk about Alabama losing by 2 touchdowns coming out of halftime against Texas A&M. This is going to be the story of the day. We're probably going to have a pretty slim chat for the next little bit since a lot of the people who come to our channel are Bama fans, but that's okay. We'll talk about it with the people that are here and shocked at the moment. Josh, I'm going to let you kind of out of the gate get into this because you and I were talking right before we started this live show. And really the shocking thing in all this, beyond the fact that Texas A&M is not a great football team, and Alabama usually doesn't get beaten, never gets beaten by great football teams, much less dominated. But the surprising thing in this game is how Alabama has just been completely outclassed on both sides of the ball in terms of lines of scrimmage.
It's been interesting, right? Because I feel like on both sides of the ball, when Texas A&M wants to draw up a blitz, then Mike Elgo's able to get that home. And when Alabama draws up a blitz, it gets absolutely stoned every time. And I won't say bizarre thing, but the surprising thing about it is that offensive line at A&M is not good. They've got a bunch of guys hurt. They've been awful all year. And it's honestly shocking that Alabama isn't in the backfield every stinking play. But moreover, the fact that A&M is actually pushing them around is really surprising. But the one thing I told you when I was looking at the stats and sort of trying to make sense of it, Brian Robinson for Alabama is at right about 6-7 yards a carry. And Spiller, as much as it feels like A&M's running it well, is at 3.8. Like Alabama's rushing for almost double per play that A&M is. And like it just doesn't feel like it, I think, because of the passing stats. Alabama's 7.5 yards an attempt. Calzada's 13. And going into this game, would you have guessed that A&M's passing attack would be twice as effective per play? I don't think anybody would have. And that's really, I think, the story so far. When Alabama's had an opportunity to take a deep shot, the blitz has gotten home about 2 out of 3 times. And then the third, the other 1/3, they've just missed. And that's not really characteristic of them in a lot of ways. And it's really a handicap. I mean, they're right now midfield, 3rd and long. And I don't have a lot of confidence they're going to convert this. I mean, he's buying time, almost eats a sack. Wow. Okay. They're going to get the 3rd down conversion, and that was huge. But
you're
that's
ahead
the
of
way.
Me, so
Yeah,
don't do play by play.
Yeah. Well, I know I'm a spoiler for Daniel, but I know all the stream's going to be behind that. So I just that was a huge play in this game, but it was painful for Alabama to convert that play. And I feel like that's been the whole game so far. It's kind of I can't remember having ever seen that with Alabama in 5 years.
I think what Texas A&M's kind of figured out right now is that you can't rush 3 and drop 8 against Bryce Young because he'll eat you alive, and that's what we saw last week. Even though Alabama outmuscled Ole Miss, the rush 3 drop 8 thing didn't work because he is that kind of quarterback. What Elko I think has figured out is I'm challenging Bryce Young to throw the deep ball, and until he does, I'm going to keep pressing and see if he can. And so far, he has not. The deep ball's been there. You even noted that there's been some wide receivers running free, and the deep ball's been there. It's just not happening for Alabama. And until it does happen, they're going to continue with the approach they've had so far, and it's been successful. What's interesting to me is I think we see this with young quarterbacks a lot, in that the first time they really see a heavy blitz, either they can really punish a defense or they kind of freak out. Do you think some of this is pre-snap issues on Bryce Young's part of not finding a hot read or something like that, or is it something else?
I mean, it's a combination of a lot of factors. I mean, to a certain degree, there's nothing Alabama's done right so far in this game. And they just got a holding call. When they got a positive play, they're going to be 2nd and 3 at the 40-yard line, one of the most beneficial positions you can be in, because you have the whole playbook's available and you can take a deep shot if you want. and they get a holding call. But Young is not reacting to the pressure well. He's held the ball too long through today with them, but they've generally held up well enough on the line. But you can't have a quarterback that's not making great hot reads and not getting rid of the ball quickly and combine it with an offensive line that's losing at a pretty good clip. A&M is bringing a ton of pressure is the truth of the matter. And if Alabama can't find a way to block it even provisionally, I mean, there's not much that you can do if you're Bryce Young, I think. I mean, we talked about before with the matchups, the reason I thought the line was as low as it was that A&M's defensive line is really, really good, at least in theory. And Alabama's O-line have been shaky. But I did not expect it to get dominated to this extent. It's basically taken over the game how poorly Alabama's been able to handle that pass rush.
So while we're at commercial and we're not instant reacting to this, maybe you're already at the end of the game since you're so far ahead of me. Stephen Light came through with a super chat and just wanted to give out a shout out to his Nittany Lions. Look, like, Josh, is it fair to say that we're not killing Penn State for this loss at all today, especially given how close that game was without Sean Clifford for 2+ quarters in this game?
Yeah, it's hard to really ding Penn State too much because when Clifford went out, the offense was moving a lot better than I expected them to, honestly. And then all of a sudden, they just completely went in the tank. I will say Clifford didn't he already have 2 interceptions at that point? So the turnovers were still there, but the offense was moving the ball. And Iowa, look, they could have turned the ball over every other drive if they scored every third drive, right? Because Iowa was not going to match 25 points in that game naturally. It just wasn't going to happen. And when he went out and ended it, I will say, and people may have hated it, but I don't know what my prediction was, but I think it was like right almost at the score. It was exactly the kind of game I thought it would be. It was 1 turnover away from Penn State winning the game, like I thought it would be. That was just a tough physical defensive football game, and those have tough swings. Yeah, there again, free rusher. I've got the Alabama game in the corner. Exactly what I was talking about. I'm ruining it for Daniel, so I'm going to try to stop doing that a little bit. But
So the thing I will say, but one more thing before we get back to the Alabama game, the Penn State situation, I think they really just wanted to make sure that everybody bet on Iowa. Iowa wanted to make sure that everybody that bet on Iowa didn't cover because they got that celebration penalty after the turnover late in the game, and they would have kicked a field goal because they would have had the ball like 20-yard line. So I thought that was kind of funny. Maybe not funny for people that had money in the game, but yeah, this is interesting. I think that like what we're seeing with Alabama's offensive line is, to me, Josh, what I'm seeing looks more like communication issues and blown assignments more than being outmanned at this point. Because you don't have a free rusher because you're outmanned. You have a free rusher because somebody's not paying attention or not doing their job, right?
Yeah, it is. And the noise is almost undoubtedly a factor because there's a lot of vocal communication that goes on. But you still, I mean, you expect it to be better than this, for Alabama being Alabama. And it's just not. So we've got a couple super chats. Let's talk about a couple things here.
Sure.
Somebody talked about perplexed Texas fans' thoughts on the Kwiatkoski, I think, defense, and what's going on there. That was a bizarre game because it was sort of a tale of two halves. That Texas had them handled in the first half. They make the switch to Caleb Williams. What was your take on it? And I'll own I'm the guy on Twitter that drew a lot of ire, not for saying that Caleb Williams wasn't good, but just making the point that, look, he came in and he sort of righted the ship, and all of a sudden their run game was able to take over with Williams. But why do you think that was? Was it just time? Was it something schematically Williams was doing for Texas or for Oklahoma rather? Was it just the semblance of a downfield passing game? I mean, what do you think the factor was there?
Well, and they noted on the broadcast, and I thought it was interesting because if you remember, Spence Rattler came in with a lot of hype, but Jalen Hurts ended up starting over him. And another free rusher, by the way, in the Alabama game. Bryce Young's not going to be able to complete a pass if they get a free run in him every play. So I think that Alabama's in real trouble. But when you have a quarterback that is a zone read threat and not a scramble threat, then that does mean the defense has to adjust a little bit. But to me, a lot of it felt like just a weird kind of constant momentum shift, like the pressure of Texas feeling like they could win this game got to them. Because if you remember, yes, they gave up a bunch of points and ultimately lost the game. But part of that was because offensively in the second half, for a quarter and a half, they did absolutely nothing. And I think that contributed to maybe the defensive stress in that game. And look, you can't fault an offense for putting up 40-something points and losing the game. But I do think that when you put up 38 in the first half and you don't ever get to pressure the other offense enough to where they have to get out of their game plan, then you put yourself in a bad position, and that's what they did. Let's see. I know we had one more super chat. I want to make sure we don't miss it. How many teams beat Ohio State on a neutral field? Okay, I don't want to make Ohio State fans upset, but there's been a lot of overreaction from Ohio State fans after beating multiple bad teams. That doesn't mean Ohio State isn't good, but I think Ohio State fans right now think all of a sudden they're the best team in the country again. I saw somebody else say Ohio State best offense in the country. Josh, unpack this a little bit, contextualize this with the competition they played.
Well, I mean, first off, Maryland lost to Iowa 51-14 last week, right? So let's bear in mind, I just watched Iowa play Penn State. That is not a dynamic offense that you would expect to score 51 points on a good team. And Maryland actually is down 3 corners. They lost some guys in that game and sort of the tail end of it. That's a defense in collapse. And when you look at the other opponents that they're playing, so it was like Tulsa and Akron, right? I'm going off the top of my head. Akron in passing defense is 127th out of 130.
Tulsa, they beat Rutgers pretty bad too. And Rutgers, held tight with Michigan 2 weeks ago. I think that's where a lot of it's coming from.
Yeah, Rutgers was sort of the big one. I mean, they're still 76th in passing defense too. And Michigan had over 10 yards per attempt. They only threw the ball 16 times, but they did throw for 163 yards on 16 attempts. Kind of a weird game on a lot of levels. But there are signs that those are not necessarily great passing defenses. And they're also, you get in a game like with Maryland and you get up on them. And Maryland has a tendency to start turning the ball over like crazy under Loxley's offense. Man, I hate to see this. And I'm trying not to do too much live reaction, but CJ Spiller just went down hurt. Doesn't look to be in great shape. And that's one of the more fun players in the SEC. Okay, he's up. So that's good. So I'd really hate to see him see that.
Didn't CJ Spiller play for Clemson like 10 years ago?
Sorry, Isaiah Spiller, not CJ. Isaiah Spiller.
This is live TV, y'all. Live TV, y'all.
But yeah, no, the deal with Ohio State is you've just got to realize you've been playing a bunch of teams that are probably going to finish like 70th or worse in pass defense. Definitely bottom third of P5. Doesn't mean you're bad by any means. That's what Daniel's pointing out, because you are putting up 60 points on them. And you got to be pretty good to put up 60 points. But if you run that RPO-ish scheme and you've got a major talent advantage, especially at wide receiver like Ohio State does, and you play a bad pass defense, Maryland has done the same thing to a lot of teams, and Maryland's not a great team themselves. So it just makes me say, hey, pause on that. Let's wait till they play some good defenses and then figure out where it is.
And Sam in the chat, I don't know if he's referencing Ohio State saying that we knocked them or somebody knocked them for taking care of business. That's not the thing. The thing is, what we said was don't overreact. Look, you lost to Oregon. You look bad against Tulsa. You played 3 bad teams in a row. You blew them out, but now you're in the chat saying you're the best offense in the country and nobody could beat you on a neutral field. That's an overreaction. Like that's what we're saying. And that's what we were saying to Penn State fans last week. Like, okay, Penn State feels like a good team, but do we honestly think Penn State's beating Georgia tomorrow, given what now Penn State got Auburn at home, Georgia got Auburn on the road. We saw what happened. And I know transitive property doesn't work, but are we really going to pick Penn State talk about them in the same sphere? And that's all we're saying is like, there's nothing bad that we've seen from Ohio State in the last 3 games. But you can't go from, we just lost to Oregon and got kind of manhandled to nobody's beating us on a neutral field because you beat up on Maryland and Rutgers. That's all we're saying.
Yeah, and look, when we have that conversation about Penn State, right, you're comparing Penn State to Cincinnati and to Oklahoma and to Ohio State and to Oregon and to Michigan, who are all behind Penn State in those rankings right now. And for example, I didn't buy that Penn State was going to beat Ohio State on a neutral field. I just didn't buy it. And I didn't really buy at all that I'm not going to throw it away, but interesting play there. I didn't buy at all that even if they played Oregon that they would necessarily win that game, right? And I still want to see where Iowa and Penn State are at. I think they're going to be in every game they play because their defenses are legit. But their offenses also have legitimate problems, and they're not very dynamic. And if they face a team with a dynamic passing offense, they're going to get in trouble if they give up a couple busted coverages or something. And now that's a 20 or 30 point, they give up 20 or 30 points in the game and suddenly they've got to score. I think they could be in real issue. But to your point with Auburn, look, it's not just that Georgia thumped Auburn. Well, and by the way, if you watch that game, it took a while for it to adjust. It took a while for Georgia to take hold. That had been my point with why I thought the spread was low. I kind of flagged it earlier when we were watching the Arkansas game that maybe that Georgia run defense isn't as dominant, and that is kind of what it looked like. But they still put away Auburn in a way that Penn State absolutely couldn't do. And Auburn offensively looked really, really limited, and that kind of makes you wonder how much you can possibly take away from from Penn State's performance. So I don't think any of that means Penn State's bad. I'm not saying Penn State's bad. I just think the Big Ten has a massive set of question marks right now, and I have absolutely no idea Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State, Ohio State, how that pecking order is going to go. I think it's going to be Ohio State at the top, but beyond there, man, I mean, trying to figure out who's the second through fifth best team right now with how little they've played each other is really, really challenging.
So we've got some super chats we need to take care of. Can we explain Chris Owens, the center, starting at tackle all season long? And you've had some thoughts on this in terms of really Alabama had center trouble last week, snap trouble last week, and everybody was watching the game saw it because I think it was like 20 off snaps in a row. Owens is getting smoked tonight, but I think Alabama fans might have a little bit of a short memory. Owens has had his troubles in spots this year, but Texas A&M's got a really good defensive line, and everybody's going to remember that Texas A&M got quote unquote blowed out by Arkansas, but that was 14 points on 2 plays, and the rest of the game
it was 20 to 10. I mean, they gave up 20 points,
right? And so I mean, their defense is good. And you're going to lose some spot, some here or there. But the issue, I think, is the middle of the line not reacting to scheme more than it is. Like Owen's been beat twice pretty bad tonight that I've seen, but I think he's held his own. So I said you might want to get into it, but I got into it for you. And now you can get into the next super chat. Michael asks, is the Big Ten East the best division in college football, Josh?
Yeah, and I'm gonna say, Sean, I see your super chat $4.99. Post a comment, and whatever comment you post, we'll assume will be the next super chat you want. So repeat that for me again, Daniel.
Is the Big Ten East the best division in college football?
That's hard to say. So let's walk through the Big Ten East, right? So Michigan State beats Miami. Ohio State loses to Oregon. Michigan, I'm trying to think to this point, have they played who they beat up?
They beat Washington
out of conference.
They lost. They beat Rutgers by 1 score last week.
Right. Penn State beat Auburn in a narrow game.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that I can quite get behind it. I mean, I think there's an argument for it, but the evidence has to be evaluated out of conference, right? What are your out of conference wins and games?
Well, Ohio State losing to Oregon, too, Josh. Like, is the second best team in the SEC West or the SEC East better than Penn State or Michigan? And then is the third best better than Penn State or Michigan? I'm going to say Big Ten East probably is the best division because of depth, but they only have one team that could really challenge an elite team. Kind of the Sagarin versus SP Plus, right?
I think there's probably I think that's probably fair. I don't know that the SEC West depth is there. Now, I mean, Arkansas thumping Texas has to come into play to some extent. And how much are we sort of penalizing Arkansas for losing to Ole Miss and losing to Georgia, right? And how much does that play into whether the SEC is worse than another conference? But I think the biggest thing is the SEC's got a few good. Kentucky, Florida, and Georgia are all pretty good in the East. And then in the West, I'd say Arkansas, Alabama, and even with this game, I'd say Arkansas, Alabama, and Ole Miss are pretty good in the West. And the East has kind of got all the teams in the Big Ten, and that's maybe the flip side to it. Interesting point, corollary there, and I noted this last week with something. Realize Iowa is very unlikely, if I'm not mistaken, to play another ranked team this year, right? They play Purdue, Wisconsin, Northwestern, Minnesota, Illinois, Nebraska. Yeah, very unlikely they play another ranked team. So it's going to be really interesting because that one win from Iowa may well get them undefeated into the Big Ten championship game. And then in the Big Ten East, you're going to have a bunch of teams that are going to start beating up on each other. Iowa's just going to hang around there, and then we're going to have a lot of questions. But I don't think we're going to really know till bowl season. The big out-of-conference games didn't solve the problems like we thought they would. We thought it was going to be this great slate, and we were going to have all these really great data points. And then, it just didn't happen.
So Sean did come back with a question, and he asked, what are our thoughts on Michigan? And I'll give mine, and I'll let you give them too, because Michigan's, they're up there this year, and they're having a good year. I think Michigan is obviously playing better than they played last year. I think they are offensively limited, but I think that even in that limitation, they've found some identity. What do you think?
Yeah, and I'll admit that was the game that I didn't watch a ton of on my rotation, but I sort of tried to keep an eye on it at least. I'm concerned when I had it on that, Michigan, I say didn't watch a ton of. I mean, the game's still on, right? But didn't watch a ton of before I flipped over here. Michigan has been really limited offensively. If you look at the box score, I mean, it's not bad, like 7.5 yards an attempt. Corum's had a few play, hasn't played a ton, but had good averages before then. The concern to me is Martinez has actually thrown it fairly well, and they can't put him away. And I'm not quite on board yet with this idea that Nebraska is a great team in hiding. I think they've just got a pretty good defense, and they're keeping them in games. But I still very much have the jury out on Michigan. In fact, I mean, you could say that about everybody in the Big Ten East, though. And at what point is that unfair? I think there's a lot of really good defenses, and I think a lot of the offenses have flaws, just like is true around the country. And it makes it just really dadgum hard to evaluate teams because, you're winning every game 31-17 or 31-20 or 24-17. And so they all look like struggle wins, even when they're not necessarily. And evaluating who has the better offense head-to-head gets really, really difficult.
Edward asked what I'm drinking tonight. So this is a good time as any to let y'all know, since somebody asked. This is Detling Cast Strength Bourbon. It is really good. It's really, really good. Their 80 proof is not great. I'll be honest. I wanted to like it. I did not like it at all. I actually thought it was pretty bad. I couldn't finish it, but this is fantastic. We just saw basically blow for blow touchdowns, A&M and Alabama. And this is getting, Josh, and I'm bringing us back to Alabama A&M because our chat is bringing us back to Alabama A&M. These are the kinds of games that Alabama does lose. They lose the turnover battle. They have something going on funky where they give up cheap touchdowns. And I don't want to say cheap because like special teams, you didn't earn it. I want to say that like you didn't have to drive the field to score or there was a massive bust kind of thing. These are the kind of games that Alabama does lose. How important is this next offensive possession for Alabama?
Well, so you got 23 minutes left in the game, right? And you're probably going to get the ball 4 or 5 more, maybe 5 more times in the game, 4 or 5 more times if you're lucky. You're running out of possessions to close a 2-score gap. And if they don't score and make this a 1-possession game again, you're going to get in a position late in the game where you don't have enough possessions to catch up, particularly since they can't really stop A&M from scoring. So you've got to score twice without letting A&M score twice to tie the game. And a lot of times you'll see coaches start doing things at this point in the game with how they play defense and stuff, and they're really counting time and counting possessions. That's where Alabama is getting to. And I agree with you. This is the kind of game they lose where, you got a special teams gaffe, you've got multiple turnovers, put them in a hole, really difficult environment, all kinds of things going against them. So, yeah, I mean, they're not in a good position. I don't know. I'm not sure how far I'd pin the odds that they'd lose at this point. But if they don't score, I would say if they don't score in this possession, probably more likely than not that A&M is going to win this game.
It'll be interesting what the ESPN, whatever their game predictor thing is, if they don't score on this, to see how it changes. So if anybody's looking at it right now, look at it, take note of it, and see what it is after this possession. I did note going into the second half, or I noticed going into the second half of the game after halftime, Alabama was minus 11.5, which would have them losing because they were down by 2 touchdowns at the half. Alabama, historically, it's been a really long game. To beat them is a long, arduous game. They've only had one game where they got blown out by more than 2 touchdowns. That was Clemson. But this feels a little different given that they haven't been in really the dominant position in any point in this game. So we'll see. Okay,
yeah,
so there's a super chat from Will C, and I'll let you take this one. This kind of game gives Georgia players incredible confidence. This loss could lead to 2 losses for Alabama. Tell me what you think, Josh.
I mean, if you're Georgia, you've got a lot of confidence. I mean, you kind of got punched in the mouth a little bit early and then stood firm, stoned them, slowly rolled on offense, took over the game. I mean, you got to be feeling pretty darn confident if you're Georgia. And really hasn't been much other than the first quarter for a bit to indicate that Georgia could lose. And given that, it's hard to it's hard to really fault it. And then the idea that Alabama would drop 2 games. How many times in the last decade has that happened? I mean, it happened in 2010, it happened in 2019, and every time I can think of where they lost a game that they weren't expecting to lose, they generally came back a better team. They're certainly going to drop in my rankings, I think, regardless because of this game. Georgia, I'll tell you right now, Georgia is going to be my number 1 team. I don't think.
Welcome to me last week.
Yeah, but but in terms of saying they're going to lose another one, I don't know. I don't know that I buy that. I want to get to another. Oh, sorry. I was going to say I want to get to a super chat we missed earlier.
Yep.
Matthew Miller asked, who would you favor in a Big 12 championship rematch of Texas and Oklahoma? My answer is simple. It'd be Oklahoma with Caleb Williams. Maybe this is a time to talk about Caleb Williams a little bit and where we feel about them going forward at the quarterback position, because that was basically everybody tweeting at us. Our tweeters at CFB Nerds. A couple people have been asking at CFB Nerds.
So, but here's my question. I did feel like the early momentum, everything felt like it was kind of slipping away for Texas. But the flip side of this is also true. We didn't expect Texas to have a great defensive showing or have a great defense this year. Isn't some of the story in that game how bad Oklahoma's defense was?
Yeah, I mean, they both got beat up pretty good on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, now you made this point earlier. The second half, Texas had 6 possessions and they scored 10 points after they kind of ran all over them for the first half. So you got to give Oklahoma credit for really kind of clamping down in the second half and slowing down the Texas, just overall Texas offense that was kind of mauling them. But both those teams gave up a ton of points. And I talked about early in the game when and Oklahoma fans were all freaking out, it was on pace to be 40-70, midway through the second quarter. And, that's not really the offense's fault. That's the defense's fault if you're giving up 35 points and a half, right? So when you're projecting these teams long-term, I think you've got major questions again defensively. If you're Oklahoma, if you're Texas, you've got major questions again on whether or not your team is going to be consistent. And if you're Oklahoma, I think the big question is, have you improved offensively? And that's where I was trying to circle around. And I know you didn't necessarily take the bait. Caleb Williams was until Ewers requalified to go a year early for Ohio State. He was the number one quarterback in the country. He's a 5-star. He was the number 6 overall recruit, bumped to number 7. And people are talking about him versus CJ Stroud. Look, he would start most places that didn't have a returning quarterback. That is a really, really talented cat that can do a lot of things, especially in the run game, that are rare. And he enrolled early. He's gotten his feet under him. And frankly, Rattler had been super inconsistent. I don't think Caleb Williams necessarily showed me that he can process information and run things on a consistent level to where you're going to have as much of a dynamic passing game as, say, like Baker Mayfield or Kyler Murray. But Rattler in that game, not only was he missing guys that were open, there were turnovers, fumble, but there were a couple key conversion opportunities where he threw the ball like clean over the receiver's head. I think one of the INTs was an airmail and there was another third down, which is around the time they actually pulled him. It wasn't the turnovers. I think it was a couple airmailed passes that should have been easy completions. And in the passing game, a drop or a missed throw is just an absolute killer. And that's where I think Caleb Williams can right the ship, is just by using that zone read game to make the defense sort of strained, taking the easy play that's in front of them. And they're going to be a pretty darn good team that are going to beat most teams by doing that. Will they beat an elite? That's a different question, but I don't think Texas is an elite. So that for the Big 12 championship's a different issue.
So does it feel to you, because this is after watching the game today, what it felt like to me is Lincoln Riley has stuck with Rattler for so long because Rattler in that offense has a higher ceiling. Like, he could put up 50 points in a game, but he also might put up 17 against the same team, whereas Williams is going to get 24 every time. And I know he put up a lot more points today, but for the point that I'm making, the ceiling may not be there once people get tape on him in this offense, but the floor is going to be higher than it is with Rattler. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, their offense is working, and they're able to run the ball. And I always talk about, if you want to make a championship, there's really one thing you've got to do consistently, and that's you got to be able to run the ball and have the routine play so you don't have a letdown, right? And Rattler couldn't do that. When they were playing teams that were not good defensively, they were just in their own head, couldn't execute, and they were getting beat. And they'd win narrowly because they do just enough, and the defense was playing pretty well, but that was it. But with Williams in there, that run game and the zone read threat and the ability, he has enough ability to throw it deep that they're going to beat teams that they should beat on a pretty consistent basis. And I know people say Rattler does not have a higher ceiling. Rattler can make NFL quality throws. And I don't mean that he's an NFL quality quarterback, but I mean he can do certain things throwing the ball that a lot of other people can't do. And that gives your offense, kind of a full open playbook. But because he's been so inconsistent, I think to your point, right, I think the coaching staff has been waiting to see if he can do enough stuff consistently overall that they can use the whole playbook. And if they did that, then they knew how high of a ceiling they could really have, right? They could really execute at a really high level, and then they could score 50, 60 points a game. And that's where they want to be. But because he was so inconsistent, you're way down here. And every little step he took was going to quickly move him up that chain. But at some point, you got to give up, and you got to say, look, we want to win a Big 12 championship, and we're not going to do it if we're that inconsistent. So let's take the higher floor and let's make it work. And I think that's where they're at.
Big Boss Ricky Ross 1 came in with a super chat with no question. So if you have a question, try to get it in, and we'll see if we can see it and answer it. But otherwise, thank you so much for the super chat. That was a weird holding pass call we just saw. It was it looked a little ticky-tack to me, but I'm interested in your thoughts on the two targeting, one called, one not, in this game. I think, in my opinion, both were targeting per the letter of the law. Neither were targeting that should have had a player ejected. Just, Josh, take 60 seconds on this and talk about whether or not you think we should move to a targeting one, targeting two kind of system.
And my thoughts on this, and it's the same thought that most everyone has kind of come to. There's got to be a flagrant, non-flagrant divide. And my point is, I have no problem with incidental targeting being a 15-yard penalty in the same way that an incidental face mask is a 15-yard penalty, right? With face masks, we do, penalize you if you grab the face mask and you don't mean to, because we want to discourage it. But the ejection is so harsh. And from a league, this is me and my lawyer brain talking. You can't penalize people out of making accidents, right? Accidents where they're not really doing anything they're not supposed to do, and they just catch weird angles. The guy's going down with the ball, and then as he ducks his head, you kind of catch him wrong because you're trying to go low. You can't penalize that away. So those should stop being an ejection. It's really overly harsh. And if this was 15 yards versus no 15 yards, very different question than ejection versus no ejection.
And I'll also note, I thought the defensive holding was a really bad ticky-tack call, and I thought this offensive holding was a really bad ticky-tack call. Larry came in with a super chat. Penn State fan, said he fought with us all week, and he felt like his boys would have won if Clifford didn't get hurt. I agree with that. I think that, look, I'll take the pick, the win on the pick that we picked Iowa to win that game. But Josh, if we're being totally honest, for me, Penn State wins that game if Clifford doesn't get hurt. I think Iowa gets close, but I still think Penn State wins that game. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that was a close game. It would have stayed a close game, but I think that ultimately they would have been able to come up with it and they would have won it. The difference in that game was the fact that Penn State's offense for about 2 quarters just totally shut down, and Iowa was able to wear on them enough that they kind of wore out the defense. They got enough opportunities. They were able to score enough to win the game. And at the end of the game, they had Penn State had no shot with Robinson at quarterback, right? When they were in, desperation mode and they really had to score, it was just done. The one where I will maybe take credit is there were a decent number of Penn State fans that were saying we were crazy for thinking Iowa had a chance in the game, and there were all the stuff that we were discounting. I don't think we were necessarily wrong for that. It was obvious that both teams belonged in the game, okay? But, the idea that, picking Penn State to win, I honestly think that was the wrong pick. I think we had it wrong. Even though we got it right, we had it wrong. And I'll give Larry credit, by the way, I want to say, because he was mixing it up in the comments and Twitter, and he came back and he owned it. And I appreciate that. So I did give him a lot of credit for that.
So, but one of the things that we talked about was the turnovers and the havoc rate for Iowa. And everybody's going to point to Clifford going out, but you started off the show talking about pretty early, Clifford had interceptions. One of them was really bad. The first one was terrible. So even before the other interceptions, Clifford had turnovers. So Iowa, at some point, we just got to start giving credit to this Iowa defense that they create turnovers. Either it's scheme or it's personnel or something's going on. That there's some built-in havoc rate there that's going to show up in the box score and is going to show up in modeling that will kind of supplement their maybe poor offensive showings.
Yeah, and that's what we talked about with the model, right? That at some point your havoc rate is significant enough that becomes a factor. Turnovers have a lot of luck. Fumble recovery is totally luck. The ability to generate interceptions, to generate fumbles, there's a lot of luck, but there's also a certain amount of predictability to it. And with Iowa, I think it's more than a little predictability. I definitely think it's something notable. Go through super chats. There's
people are probably just going to let everybody know you're probably going to make fun of me because I put ice in my bourbon, but I don't care. It's better that way, and I do try everything neat before I decide if it needs water or ice, and then this happens. So, Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to burn through a couple more super chats. Somebody said, what offense does Georgia have? What do they need? They just put them away and they don't ever run the score up. I think that's kind of the point, right? Their defense is so dominant that the ability to lean on a team for 4 quarters is a perfectly viable offense. Alex Reidel and a couple other people have mentioned the win probability. Frankly, you talked about it. I thought you were, in your point, I think, because you were interested to see it because it's so weird. I've never understood it or felt like it had any meaning or merit. It must be something based off teams with this yardage and this amount of scoring historically lose or win at a certain clip, but it doesn't necessarily seem to consider who the teams are. Like,
Yeah.
what I mean by that is it'll say like, and I was looking at it earlier, Alabama had an 18% chance to win it early in the third quarter. But
Before that last touchdown, yeah.
right. But I think the way their system works, if I had to guess, it would give that same number if it was Maryland instead of Alabama with the same stats, or at least something pretty similar. That's the impression I've gotten. And in my experience watching that stat, when one of the teams is an elite team, and when I say elite, I mean like top 5 recruiting class team in that position, they beat that odd or those odds like 4 out of 5 times. It is never as consistent as it thinks. And then there are other times where it thinks a team has a chance. And if they're, a not talented team, generally they're out of it. So I really don't think it does nearly enough to take into account who the teams are that are in that position.
More super chat house cleaning. Larry came back and said Penn State was up even with the turnovers. And that's not really what we were saying. Like we've already conceded that if Clifford stays in the game, they win. What we're saying is a lot of Penn State fans were saying Iowa creates turnovers because they're playing crappy teams that are playing from behind, and Penn State is not going to turn the ball over, which is not true in this game. Penn State did turn the ball over. They were able to survive it early, but the point remains that this was and Larry, this was not a bad about Penn State. This was a good about Iowa, that their ability to create turnovers is something that's part of their DNA. That's all we were saying.
And several people have talked about Iowa being 12-0, and there's a super chat on it. And I want to note, we touched on that earlier, that with Iowa's schedule, it's more likely than not than they do go 12-0, and they're going to end up in the Big Ten championship game against a team. It's probably going to be a lot more beat up, but also a lot more proven than Iowa. And that's going to be a fascinating matchup, not unlike that's happened a couple times. Was it like Iowa or Northwestern? No, it was Wisconsin that's met Ohio State a couple times with really good records, but having played nowhere near the same level of competition. Whoever comes out of the Big Ten East is going to have like 4 ranked wins. That's going to be Iowa's only ranked win, quite possibly at the end of the season.
And I think historically we've seen when there's a team that's that kind of deficient on one side of the ball, even with a weak schedule, they usually drop a game. But that would be interesting if they were undefeated, especially if they lose that game. But I think that you're going to have to look at their schedule, which comes to a question. Apep Jones with the super chat asking, isn't the championship game going to come down to the 2 most balanced teams? And if we agree with that point, doesn't that mean it's Alabama and Ohio State? One, I don't know that Georgia has had to show their offense yet, or had to do anything that's really stressed them to the point where they need to break out their full playbook or anything like that. I think we still have some, like, we're assuming that Georgia doesn't have a great offense because their defense is so good. The jury's out. They might still have a really good offense. And conversely, I think the jury is kind of out on Ohio State. I want to see them play Penn State. Not that I don't think they can beat them, but I want to see if some of the things that defenses were doing to Stroud and Penn State early in the season, Penn State can do, because they've got a really good defense. What do you think about that balance comment?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, there's 2 things that are required to win a championship. 1, you have to make the playoff. And 2, you've got to win it. And, to the point with Iowa, teams that are really good defensively, teams that have a run game, which is where Oklahoma is going to be headed at the end of the year, or through the rest of the year, I think, those are the teams that are best positioned to get to the playoff. And then but the problem is, once you're in the playoff, you tend to be paired with multiple high-level teams, at least a couple of which are going to have really high-level offenses. And now all of a sudden you need an offense, and you need the ability to be balanced and dynamic. With Georgia, I think they're really well positioned to make the playoff. The question is, if they get to the playoff and they face an Ohio State, because I think Ohio State is capable. Would you agree with this? Ohio State's going to be capable of scoring 25 points, even on a defense like Georgia's, just because they've got enough skill position athletes.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And if they're in that game, is Georgia's offense good enough to put up 30 themselves? And that's with the assumption that Ohio State's going to be a lot better defensively at the end of the year than they even are now. And that's really the question. I do think with Georgia, I've heard rumors of this, and I think I've seen it, look, last year we were really vocal that we thought Stetson Bennett got a really bum rap. I think he hurt his shoulder in that Florida game where he looked really bad and wasn't the same guy. But also, he'd been really efficient for them until he was in a position where he had to score a ton. But I think he's going to be the guy. Everything I'm hearing, it looks like Stetson Bennett's going to be the starter the rest of the year. And there's I keep hearing a lot of rumors on whether or not Daniels is hurt. If that injury is keeping him, he can play, but maybe can't really throw very effectively if he does play, or whether they're just really comfortable with the efficiency you get from Bennett.
I have a theory that Bennett is actually better and beat him out. Like I think, and look, I'm gonna go down in flames or stand at the top of the mountain on this, Josh. I have been team Stetson Bennett since last year. I thought he actually played really well against Alabama. I think in my mind that Bennett just was better in practice and in the summer and over the course of the first few weeks being in the season. I think he beat him out. I think he did. Call me crazy.
Yeah, I think you may be right, but here's another question for you. Do you think if they start Stetson Bennett the rest of the year, is that the Kirby Smart making the same decision he did when he started Jake Fromm over Justin Fields?
No, look, we have long said, I think those are two different situations. Kirby Smart incorrectly takes heat for starting Fromm over Justin Fields. Jake Fromm was like 13-1 his freshman year or whatever that number was. He lost to Alabama and then had one loss the next year. So he's coming off a national championship game run. He had one loss, and he was playing to play for the national championship against Alabama, had the lead at halftime. You don't bench him when he had the lead at halftime against Alabama to play to be in the playoffs and win the SEC championship. You don't bench him for a true freshman. Sorry. People are taking Justin Fields, who he was as a junior at Ohio State, and projecting that into that situation. This, I think, is different. And I think Georgia fans, they're going to disagree with me here. They're going to disagree with me because of the psychology behind they've seen what they think is a not elite quarterback in Stetson Bennett, or not a great quarterback in Stetson Bennett because they remember his flaws. And they think there's this super high ceiling with JT Daniels that they're missing out on. And there's no way that JT Daniels could have been beaten out by Stetson Bennett. But I'm telling y'all, Bennett is better than you're giving him credit for, and you can win a national championship with him if your defense is that good.
Yeah, I agree. I'm looking through comments. There's two games that have come up a bunch that we haven't really touched on. One is since Virginia Tech is currently beating Notre Dame, and comments on that game quickly, and two, people are asking about the impact on that on Cincinnati by extension. And two, Kentucky is currently up 42-21 on LSU. And what do we think about Kentucky, which you kind of know my thoughts, and what does that say about LSU?
I'm really tired of beating on LSU at this point. But also, to your credit, I think in July you were pumping up Kentucky. And Kentucky to me is a lot like Penn State in that we have this feeling in our stomach, Josh, that Kentucky's not as good as their 6-0 record. But I think they're a lot better than the feeling we had in our stomach about Wake Forest being undefeated, right? Like, I think they're a better team. Like, there's a reason to think Wake Forest might have been a pretender entirely. I don't know that there's a really reason to think Kentucky is a pretender at this point.
Yeah, and let me look it up, right? I'm trying to think Kentucky's remaining schedule. Obviously, they play Georgia, Mississippi State, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, New Mexico State, Louisville. I think they very well may lose. They're going to lose two more games. And what I kind of expect out of them is a lot like what happened with Arkansas, where they got in the game with Georgia and just got outclassed. And we all kind of said, oh, they're a fake. But they looked pretty competent against Ole Miss. When I think Arkansas and Ole Miss are actually both very good teams. And I think Kentucky is a team that really is no threat to make the playoff or especially win the playoff. I mean, I don't think they're going to beat Georgia. If they beat Georgia, they're not going to win the SEC championship. But that doesn't mean they're not a top 10 team this year, given
Right.
where everything's at.
Right.
And my point with them had been with all those transfers, Wandale Robinson, they got like the best player from Nebraska. They get Dare Rosenthal, that was kind of like the one really good lineman from LSU, or the one tackle was really the bigger point. And they get a transfer quarterback, and all of a sudden you pair that with a defense that had a bunch of guys coming back was really good. And I felt like they were getting slept on. I mean, their problem has been poor quarterback play and offensive weapons, and they got enough to be good. But yeah, I don't think they're necessarily that much better. And then Notre Dame, look, it's hard for us not to be viewed as Notre Dame hitters, and they may pull this game through. The problem with Notre Dame is a lot of Notre Dame fans want Notre Dame to be viewed as a playoff team every year. And they really I don't think they have a lot of patience for us saying, this year you're not a top 5 team, you're maybe a top 15 team. And that's where they are. They're a good team. They're not a playoff caliber team. They shouldn't be in the playoff. They would have really struggled with a team of that caliber. And to me, it's not even a resume thing with Cincinnati. It's just sort of trying to evaluate them in terms of a quality program. I get the same fear that if Cincinnati was actually it's fair to put them in a BCS game, but people do not understand the jump from New Year 6 game to being in the playoff with Georgia. And I know you played Georgia close last year, and we can talk about all the asterisks involved in that, but being on the big stage and trying to win those back-to-back, different question. And I don't know that Notre Dame or Cincinnati is again, they're in that same tier with Kentucky. Perfectly fine putting Cincinnati in the top 10, but once you get over 5, 4, 3, that evaluation gets a whole heck of a lot harder.
Jermaine Jones has made a couple of comments about Georgia, and I don't know if he's taking umbrage at what people in the comments are saying or taking umbrage at what we're saying, but his second super chat was that we're sitting here, or somebody sitting here, saying that Georgia needs to score more than they're already scoring to win the national championship. I'm not saying that. I think Georgia's defense is phenomenal, and they scored 37 against Arkansas. I think if they score 37 against Alabama, they're going to beat Alabama. I don't think Alabama's scoring 37 on them right now. I don't think Ohio State is scoring 37 on them right now. So if that came through in what we were saying, I apologize, because I don't believe that at all. I think Georgia's defense is bonkers, and I wouldn't count on anybody scoring 37 on them. Josh, we got a super chat asking from Michael about any notable observations on the undercard games. We haven't touched really on what's going on. I know you mentioned Nebraska, Michigan adjacently, and that Virginia Tech's currently losing. Any thoughts on maybe Michigan, Nebraska, because that's the one we haven't really talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I had said that I didn't necessarily buy that Nebraska is that great of a team, but they're still, they're currently winning that game. And the bigger point there is 22 points in the third quarter, and Michigan is struggling to move the ball. I'm looking at box score. I'm admitting I can't follow all these at once live, but McNamara 6.9 yards per attempt. Corum was 85 yards and just 10 carries. I don't know why he hasn't gotten the ball more. Looking at the stats, maybe somebody can explain that, or maybe people will explain that there's no reason for him not to have gotten the ball more than he has. But I thought my problem with Michigan is schedules are everything. Rutgers, I don't think is a very good team. They get credit for playing Michigan close, but there's a little sketchiness there. Washington's proven to not be good. Western Michigan, Northern Illinois, those don't really mean anything. And then, you're in a close game with Nebraska. I don't know. I think the jury is completely still out there on Michigan, and there's enough data to make me think Nebraska's not great. So Michigan maybe is a.
This is really what has frustrated Penn State and Notre Dame fans with us is your wins, right? Like your wins are informative too, and we'll give you one. We'll give you one, like struggle for 3 quarters against Florida State last year, Notre Dame, or struggle against Louisville. I think they beat them like 17-10. We'll give you one. But right now you're losing to Nebraska, and you beat a improved but not great Rutgers team, and you want to be in the top 10. You beat them by 1 score. At some point, multiple 1-score games against teams that other teams are murdering is pretty informative, right, Josh?
Yeah, at some point it does become informative. And look, it'd be one thing if you're having one score wins like Iowa, Penn State, right? I'm not going to fault Penn State too much for having a one score win over Auburn and a one score loss over Iowa. Maybe if we're talking again, when they were number 4, we get really hypercritical because we're saying you're slotted for the playoff. But if you want to talk about them as a top 10 or top 15 team, I'm not going to be too rough on that. But when you have one score wins over Nebraska and Rutgers, it's a little bit of a different conversation. And I mean, that just sort of
Notre Dame did tie the game up, but like this is another one, right? Like Notre Dame tied the game up against Virginia Tech. Although I will say Virginia Tech at 3-1, if they get this Notre Dame win, like that program has been looking for some positivity for a while now. Is this kind of a good turning the corner for them, at least for what their expectations have been reset to?
I think so. I mean, there are a lot of teams out there that just need to get to the point where they're playing competitively, and you need to win some of these. But you look at a team like Nebraska, and they haven't been in games with top 15 teams where they look like they could win on any sort of consistent basis. So I definitely think that's a positive. I'm going to give a shout out. There's a super chat here to Lamar Stevens, and his comment is,
I was hoping we'd touch on it.
Yeah. Thank you, Kentucky. Now, Lamar is one of the best natured guys we have in the comment section. Huge LSU fan, goes back and forth with us, but gives as much as he takes, and he owns it when stuff isn't going his way. And Kentucky just won that game 42-21. Elephant in the room, and I'm just going to put you on the spot. Does not Les Miles, so it sort of shows where my mind's at. Does Ed Orgeron survive to next week, given the blowout loss to Kentucky?
And I'm hoping, and Lamar, you don't have to super chat that. We'll keep an eye out for your answer. I'll answer that and say, here's the problem. Like, and Josh Pate, shout out to him. He said this 3 weeks ago that USC hasn't filled their spot because all the agents for the big coaches that are looking to make a move are waiting for the LSU job to open up. And not only do they want that job more, but they're going to use that job as leverage if they end up at USC. And I think it's super smart, and I think everybody knows that it's coming. Now, here's the problem. If you know your coach is a dead man walking, Josh, don't you have to get out in front of it and fire him as soon as possible instead of waiting? Because at some point, you want to be the team that's positioned to get the best available coach and let everybody else fight for the ones that are left, right?
I mean, you fire him when you fire him. And you fire him because you have to fire him. It's the same conversation I always have with people talk about, why are they playing this right tackle or this quarterback or what have you? Well, it's almost always because he's the best we've got, and we're not in a position to be able to get to move to somebody else. And invariably, you end up seeing that guy replaced by someone else who's better. But you know why? Because they played the guy who was better when they found a guy who was better to play. And if you're a good coach, you don't ever replace someone with someone worse. That's like the Caleb Williams thing with Rattler, right?
Right.
And with Ed Orgeron, they're going to fire him if they feel like they have a chance to replace him with someone competent. What you don't want to be in the situation is that what the situation you don't want to be in is the situation Auburn was last year. Would you agree with that? Where they fired Gus Malzahn,
and everybody else the musical chairs happened, and everybody else had already been taken.
Right, but the other side I was going to say is they fired him, and they didn't have the money to hire the guy they wanted to hire.
Right,
because Harsin may or may not be a great coach. I am skeptical. This in today's game, people have been pretty vocal about it. There's a lot of reasons for that, but everything I've heard, there's no doubt that once they let Harsin go, and they had to pay when they let Gus Malzahn go, because they'd given them this big extension in 2017, they didn't have the money to hire the tier coach they wanted. And Harsin was a pretty good hire for the monetary sphere they were looking at. They were looking at like UAB coach, who's Clark's a really good guy, but he's never coached at that level. They had no real ability to hire a major head coach.
Well, weren't they looking like, wasn't there a quiet coup to get Kevin Steele installed as head coach, and it kind of fell through after they fired Gus Malzahn. I don't want to go too much into it because there is a lot going on with the Alabama game right now, and a lot of super chat action. But yeah, let's get through
yeah.
it.
So that's kind of where I was going. I was trying not to get in conspiracy theory land, but there's a lot of evidence that a lot of boosters wanted to just promote Kevin Steele, get rid of Malzahn. And then the AD, I think smartly came in and said, no, you're not going to just promote the defensive coordinator and pay $20 million to get rid of the head coach. Orgeron and his staff, I've heard the number is between 25 and 27 million dollars to buy out that whole coaching staff. And I don't know where they're at financially right now in COVID land. A lot of people have taken a hit. That is a heck of a lot of money to fire a coaching staff and then hire a new one. And it may be that it's an attractive program, but they've got Title IX questions. There's a pending NCAA investigation. You can only really get rid of Ed Orgeron if you can afford it, literally afford it, and you think you can actually get a good coach. And if you can't, you almost have to hold on to him so that you can get back into a financial position that you can fire him and replace him. Because if you fire him too early and you don't have the money, then you replace him with somebody else, so you're going to have to fire. And that's just this hole that keeps digging. And Larry's
mad.
made a bunch.
We commented on two of them, but he's mad. Like, we conceded that Penn State would win had Clifford stayed in. He's mad that we're not conceding that Penn State would have blown them out. But I don't think they were they got up early, but they didn't really create as much separation as they could have in the first half. I don't think Penn State puts up 40 points on that Iowa defense with Clifford healthy. I think they win. I totally think they win that game. And Larry, we weren't ignoring you. I hope you don't feel ignored. But yeah, go ahead.
I just say just basic stats, okay? Clifford was 5.8 yards per attempt, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions.
That's bad.
He'd made some conversions and things, and I think they win the game with him. But you're not going to blow someone out at 6 yards an attempt, throwing multiple. And he threw multiple. He was on pace to have 4 or 5 interceptions in that game if he continued. Those aren't blowout numbers. So, yeah, I think that's probably some undue criticism there. And we try to give credit to the super chat, but that's just where my opinion is.
Okay, so coming back to the Alabama Texas A&M game, because this is what everybody's talking about in the chat, really. One thing I noticed, everybody was surprised that Alabama kicked a field goal in the last possession when they had 4th and 2 on the 10-yard line. I was not, because I think two things have happened, Josh. I think that Alabama has adjusted on both lines of scrimmage. And I think defensively they've figured something out. They've made some adjustments. Offensively they have as well. What have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, so going into the half, this game was, check my scoreboard. 24-10. It's now 31-27.
And that was a kick return.
Right. So it's 17-7 in the second half. And Alabama's put themselves in a position, and they're driving now where if they score, they can take the lead. It was too early for them to chase points. I know 4th down conversion percentages and analytics and all that. I get all of it. But I mean, I think it was a fine decision.
Lane Kiffin would have gone for it.
Yeah, he would have. He would have gone for it. Right. But I mean, their defense had settled down. They were starting to slow A&M down. They've adjusted a lot there, and the offense has a lot of momentum. I wasn't surprised they made the decision. Can we talk about a decision that we both had talked about really before we started this? Why did Alabama not try to get the ball back in the first half? And how bizarre was it that Saban didn't even understand the question from the reporter about it?
Well, it's funny. We've said this forever, watching Alabama games for however many years now, since they've been decent. Saban despises trying to find points or trying to find some time and save some time at the end of the first half to score. He hates it. He doesn't want to do it. He never is. I don't know if it's like a situational awareness thing. I can imagine that it is, because Saban probably knows a thing or two about football. It's always been really surprising to me. Maybe it's a risk-averse thing, but he's never done it. He's never tried to save time at the end of the second quarter. And in spite of Gary Danielson reminding him who's going to get the ball to start the third quarter.
Yeah, Well, and what really struck me about that is Alabama kind of regained momentum in this game. How? They blocked a punt for a touchdown, right? So that's why you call timeouts when you're down multiple scores going into the half and there's like a minute left, because you might be able to get a special teams play. And Saban, the thing that got me wasn't that he made the decision, it's that he didn't even understand the question or even get the question. It's like it doesn't enter his mind. If there was one thing where I would be critical of Saban as a coach, it's that I don't feel like his clock management and timeout management at any point in his career has been particularly productive for Alabama. He's way too defensive with timeouts, and he kind of uses them like they just called a timeout because they weren't lined up or whatever. It's like he saves them for these, oh no, we're going to screw up moments, and he really doesn't value how much saving time can be worth.
But he
or
gets
just
it
like
at the end of the second half. He doesn't get it at the end of the first half. It's really bizarre.
Well, at the end of the second half, you have to. I mean, he calls timeouts because he's in his position where it's necessary, right?
To me, in modern football, and like we talked about before, and we talked about this with the Alabama Ole Miss game, you need to be more concerned with possessions than points, right? And that's what Saban seems to understand in the second half, but never in the first half. He's never like a minute and a half left in the first half, and it's clear the opponent on their 7-yard line is going to run it up the middle and try to escape the half. That's what they want to do. At least make them punt. To your point, you don't know what's going to happen if they punt the ball. Like, at least make them do the thing that they're really trying not to do. I've always found that pretty surprising. Looks like maybe Notre Dame's going to win, and Michigan is tied with Nebraska. Josh, I want you to touch on this because we pointed this out in the Oklahoma game, even though Nebraska lost. Adrian Martinez, 11.6 yards per attempt. What's going on with that? Like, isn't that something of note now that they've played a couple of good defenses and he's done all right?
Is it fair to say at this point that it's just kind of who Adrian Martinez is, that you don't know which Adrian Martinez is going to show up in a given game? And I'm serious about that, right? There are a lot of times we talk about a quarterback can look good when certain things are working and a quarterback can look bad when certain things aren't. But it's like he opened against Illinois, who's not a good team, and went 7 yards an attempt. And then he was 11 against Fordham, 12 against Buffalo, 11.5 against Oklahoma. Michigan State goes back to 7.2. Northwestern, who's traditionally a good defense, 11.9, and it like totally up and down. The one pattern I'll say is there's twice this season where he's thrown over 30 attempts, and those were the two games where he was under 7.5 yards an attempt. So maybe the best way to put it is simply if they can run the ball and where he doesn't have to throw, he can be pretty good, pretty good player at just trying to take what the defense is giving him. And
somebody said Adrian Martinez is a more talented Bo Nix.
I don't know. They're different. They're different players, I think.
So Josh, and y'all let us know in the chat. Josh has this theory that Bo Nix was ruined by Gus Malzahn and never recovered. And that he could have, in a decent system, been a lot better quarterback. Let us know in the chat. Josh, you can unpack that a little bit if you want.
Yeah, I mean, Bo Nix is, if you watch him right now playing, like in the Georgia game or the LSU game, he plays sandlot football when he's at his best. Like, he's just kind of running around, like making something happen, throwing the ball, scrambling, which is great and wonderful, but you can't consistently score that way. It's been the way they've gotten points in these, like the LSU win when they got to get to 23. That'll get you 2 touchdowns. But in terms of like running an offense where you've got to consistently move the ball, and that's the only way you can hit 30 points, he just doesn't get there. And I feel like if he had been taught a proper offensive scheme from the jump, if he had been sat on a bench for a year as a freshman and they'd reinforced him, okay, this is what you do to keep your eyes up, this is how you make your reads, do this over and over and over again, you'd end up with a different player. Whereas now he as a force of habit, because that first year their defense was really good at Auburn, but the offense wasn't good. I think that was 2018 or 2019. He kind of had to learn to play that Sandlot style of football that they've been playing. And those habits built to where that's how he operates and that's how he's comfortable. And I don't think he's ever going to be the player he maybe could have been. And I'm often very critical of starting. I think we're both super critical of playing guys in the NFL too early for the same reason, right? Players will reflect their habits, and quarterbacks kind of end up looking like their habits. So if you let them establish bad habits and you teach them to play a certain way by forcing them in a bad situation, you don't end up with the same quarterback as one where you get him used to playing the right way, and then you only throw him into the fire when he knows how he's supposed to do it, and then he'll repeat that process over and over again.
Cody, we love you too. Josh, let me ask you this: how important to Alabama is Brian Robinson at this point?
I mean, they're out there backup running back, right?
Yep. And look, and I frame this with the thought that coming into the season, we kind of felt Brian Robinson was just a guy. But here's the last two kind of most important games for Alabama this year, and he's been the one to step up. Like, I feel like if he went down, Alabama would be kind of screwed.
Yeah, I don't think they've got. I mean, obviously their running back depth's not a good spot. And the backup Williams has played some, but not a ton, and I haven't seen anything to indicate that he could be the guy. So given their running back situation, they've really got to lean on him. And I'm not even sure that he's in a high elite black like they're used to, but he's Trey Sermon, best example, Ohio State. Like he's their Trey Sermon. I don't know that he's a first round draft pick, but maybe he's a solid back. I'm not sure if he's even quite as good as Sermon is, but he's kind of riding the ship in a way that maybe nobody else on that roster can quite do.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Okay, so it looks like Notre Dame did win against Virginia Tech, but again, like this informs, and I hate to like take a victory lap on Notre Dame fans, but they were really mad at us. Well, since forever, Josh, but isn't a 3-point win over Virginia Tech kind of also informative?
I think a 3-point win is also informative. We talked about how their record may not be great this year because of the number of teams they're playing, but I didn't necessarily put Virginia Tech on that list as a high-level team. And I don't know. This goes back to the how much do you want to rank just on wins and losses, and how much do you want to rank on your ability to put teams away with the thought of how would you actually do against a schedule with more elite teams, and how are you going to do over the rest of the year? And that's sort of a difficult evaluation. And that's Alabama just kicks a field goal, and that is exactly why they were right to kick the field goal earlier, because now they can kick a field goal to win. And if they'd been chasing points and not gotten it, they'd still be chasing points. So I think they made the right decision there.
Right.
That funny. Somebody made a funny comment. Bama 3 passes from the 4-yard line. I remember another famous game from almost a decade ago where Alabama was in a chance to win the game and then threw 4 passes from like first and goal from the 4. Do you remember that?
Yeah, and that was an offensive coordinator that you didn't like at all. Like for Alabama, I think you always felt like he was a little bit in over his head. But yeah, I mean, this is interesting. I do think that everybody's saying bad play calling, but if the either throw to Billingsley was a little tighter or to 18 was a little tighter, either one of those throws is a touchdown, and it's the right call because you got single man coverage and they're selling out for the run. So I think that both of those were good calls.
Alabama was getting one-on-one man coverage across the board. The problem for Alabama is none of the receivers got a win, but I don't blame the play call for that. That's just that's execution, not call.
Yeah, and everybody's saying Georgia #1. Josh, let's say Alabama wins this game by 8 points. Like some weird stuff happens, or the defense continues to hold, and then win this game by 8 points. Are you still putting Georgia #1 tomorrow?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Right. I expected Alabama to win this game like 40-10. I mean, that's why I had them #1. And if they can't do that, then given where Georgia's doing, there's no way I can put put Alabama number 1. I mean, they're still going to be number 2 if they win this game, because I don't know who would.
That's an interesting question. What if they don't? Like, what if they lose this game by 3 points? Are you really putting Iowa ahead of Alabama right now? Like, because like even in this game,
do you think Iowa loses to Texas A&M right now?
I do not, but I don't think Iowa beats Florida on the road. I don't know. Like, I think Iowa Texas A&M would be a good game. It would be like 10.
But how much with Florida was the two of us overreacting to how Florida, because they'd destroyed nobodies, looked really good against Alabama. And we're like, well, maybe this is actually a good team. And then they turn around and lose to Kentucky. Well, Kentucky does look like they're a pretty good team, but maybe Alabama has real problems in the line of scrimmage, and maybe that's
Iowa
the data point.
On the road beat Texas A&M? I'm not sure. I think Alabama would beat Iowa by 2 touchdowns. Even the Alabama, because second half Alabama in this game has figured some stuff out. It took them a while to adjust. They still might lose this game. I kind of feel like they will. But I have a hard time. Like, we've got Alabama playing. Alabama has played now at Florida, home against what's probably going to be a borderline top 10 Ole Miss, at Texas A&M, who's not great, decent team. I think Texas A&M is better than Indiana. I have a hard time. I have a hard time putting Iowa over Alabama, but I also have a hard time only dropping Alabama 1 spot. So I don't know what to do there.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to fall behind any 1-loss teams, and that probably includes Ohio State, because I know Oregon's ranked high, but I'm not sure how great they really are and how much of that is just because they beat Ohio State, right?
Right.
And I think they end up staying up there. The truth of the matter, and this is a realistic point, does it even matter for Alabama if they lose this game?
Well, it does, because they don't have any room to lose to Georgia in the SEC championship game.
I think that's the answer, right?
Yeah.
That Alabama losing this game only matters if they lose another game. And that
Alabama losing this game eliminates any breathing room that they had. And we talked about Clemson and Georgia, the winner of that game, having some breathing room to take a loss. Alabama, this would be, if Alabama went on to win out the rest of the year, this would be Alabama's Virginia Tech game for Ohio State in 2014, right? But yeah, it's a perfectly good question, because the big concern was last week for Alabama if they lost to Ole Miss, because Ole Miss may not lose another game this year, which, though, by the way, with that defense today, they might. But yeah, they have no more breathing room, because coming into this week, Josh, we were saying, and everybody was saying, look, Alabama, Georgia are going to go into that SEC championship undefeated. So there's 2 spots, and everybody else is fighting for the other 2. And now Alabama would have to literally beat Georgia, and then Georgia still probably gets in, right?
Yes. I feel like that's pretty.
If 12-0 Georgia loses to an 11-1 Alabama in that SEC championship game, both of those teams are going in the playoffs. And that's like the worst thing for everybody else.
I can't see any way that doesn't happen. Yeah, given the landscape of college football, I just can't see any way that doesn't happen.
Somebody said that somebody tell me if you agree with this. Somebody said that Ohio State beats Texas A&M by 4 touchdowns.
I can't properly evaluate Ohio State versus A&M right now. I just can't do it. I mean, maybe they do. I think A&M secondary is not great. They're down players. There's a reason they lost to Mississippi State, and it's that their secondary isn't a great secondary, but their D-line is really good. Can Ohio State handle A&M's run game, which is pretty good? I don't know. I mean, I don't know the answers to any of those questions. Let me own one thing I said, and I'll let you comment on it to say whether or not I was crazy. I made the comment on Twitter, and this was a quip, right? Our Twitter comments, don't take them as gospel, right? We're just kind of going the flow. That I thought Caleb Williams might even be better than CJ Stroud. Was that insane? Or do you think it's at least open to interpretation at this point?
It's hard for me. This is the tough thing, because I have this theory about backup quarterbacks coming in mid-game. There's no tape on them. Sometimes they can kind of rise to the occasion for a moment, and then fall down to earth. I've only got half a game of tape on Caleb Williams. Also, on the flip side, like everybody was ready to bench Stroud after the game he didn't play against Akron, and their backup put up a ton of points. So, Josh, I don't know. Like, I don't know, because in this stretch for Ohio State, they haven't played anybody. And I want to see somebody play Oklahoma that's got tape on Caleb Williams.
Yeah, we see this a lot when you get a backup quarterback that comes into the game. They usually have a package of plays they've been working on, right? So they practice a limited set. It's usually designed for if the starter gets injured more than anything. And it's, can you close out a game with a backup? So they've got a set of plays they teach them, and they rep that small universe of plays. What gets difficult is if they become the starter, that coaches for the next game watch the tape of that package of plays. It might be like 20, 25 plays, and they see 18 of them. And now all the defenders know those 18 plays, and they get really hard to run. And can that backup quarterback add another 20 plays to his repertoire? Can he run the full playbook, or can he run that limited package with a defense that knows what they are well enough to win? And a lot of times you find out they just kind of can't. So, I think it's all very much an open question. And here was my point with Stroud. It's not a ding on Ohio State, I think, and it's not a ding on where Stroud is going to be, but I think he's still a little skittish and inconsistent, but I think he's operating what is otherwise quite possibly might be the best collection of skill talent in the country, period. With Olave and Wilson, with Henderson, with their offensive line. That's probably the best group of talent in the country. And most quarterbacks are going to be really, really successful with that. Oklahoma has a lot of theoretical talent, but it's not all put together. The receivers don't get wins like you would expect for their recruiting level. And, like they got the second best receiver from Arkansas, Woods. It seems to be one of their standouts. That's telling to me. So I do kind of question how much, like Rattler versus Stroud. Is Rattler just the quarterback in a bad situation and Stroud's the quarterback in a good situation? And I don't think we really know the answer to that. So personally, that's kind of where I was coming from. And I think if you put Williams in that offense, and they would run the ball way the heck more with Williams, I think they'd be really, really scary. But I don't think we really know. Different conferences, different situations.
Yeah, I would like, I don't know. I mean, well, Bryce Young does not have a great D-ball. Mike Farino says, and this is going back to our previous comment about both Alabama and Georgia getting in certain situations, if there was a blowout on either side, then one would get in and the other would stay at home. And I think that if we're hoping for Renaissance season and not a bunch of SEC teams in, regardless, as long as the SEC East and West champions have only one loss, I think the nation is pulling for either the one-loss team to lose. Sorry, I hit my glass. Either the one-loss team to lose, or there to be a massive blowout, right? Like that's what you need to really kind of at the last minute sort of shift the conversation on who gets into the playoffs.
Yeah, and we've kind of been there before, but that's absolutely where you'd want to be to shift the conversation. And look, that's a long way away, and there's a lot more stuff that's going to happen. A lot of teams that haven't lost are going to lose. Teams that are not great right now are going to turn it around. We're not even halfway through the year, so it's all a little premature. But yeah, I agree with all that.
We've got two questions that are similar in the Super Chat. Apep Jones and Jermaine both said, sort of, what's the Vegas odds of somebody scoring 20 or more on Georgia? And then what teams can put up 4 TDs on Georgia? I think Alabama most likely could score. Alabama's scoring more than 20 on Georgia. Like they just are. Now, the question is, can that defense hold Georgia to whatever point total? And then what? You don't think that? You don't think Alabama's
No, you're going to see why I said wow. There was no way not to say wow. But yeah, I don't think you can hold a team with high-level athletes and skill players to less than 4 touchdowns. So yes, now that everybody has seen it, and Daniel, let me know when you see the play.
I've seen it. What? How do you like? I mean, I know Jameson Williams couldn't start at Ohio State, but you still need to cover him at Alabama.
Well, the thing I was about to say is Alabama has found their number one receiver, and it's not Mechie, it's Jameson Williams, who
Yeah.
hit every major play on that drive, and then you don't cover him. That was
It was almost a bad throw. Like, it was kind of a bad throw.
He almost threw it in the dirt, which was crazy to me. But that was Kentucky versus Florida. Like, remember that? Like, like twice in the same game where they didn't cover the guy on the sideline. I can't even think of the last time I saw this. Interesting. Alabama's going for two from the weirdest formation.
Funky Fudge says this was the best week of college football I've ever seen in a long time. So many one-score games. This has been the best year I've seen of just absolute fun, craziness. Like, Josh, and look, Josh Pate had a good point earlier this week. I hate that I'm referencing more than once this week. I don't want to blow up his ego. But he said that even if it is Alabama and Georgia in the national championship game, don't let that ruin your joy about how awesome this season has been. And hasn't that kind of been your thought process or your feeling throughout the season this year?
Yeah, I mean, everybody wants a playoff, right? Because they always say, well, we want more access and teams to be involved, et cetera, et cetera. Look, I still can't believe watching this that how Bryce Young didn't manage to just lob this ball up. Right. I mean, he almost threw it in the dirt. Like, Bryce Young is off this game. That is half of what's been happening in Alabama because he hit a deep ball to save his life. And then they throw to Jameson on.
Isn't there something though, Josh, to when somebody is so wide open that it's like even harder sometimes?
Yeah, it is. But yeah, to your point, like this is the point I've always made is okay. Well, we don't like a lot of this expansion because my point is always okay. If you look at what an 18, I said this multiple times. Like okay, an 18 playoff. Look at what an 18 playoff does in most years. Look at the actual matchups. And 3 out of 4 games in week 1 are a foregone conclusion. And I think everybody loves the idea of it in October or November when they're trying to vie for a spot. But when you see how teams look in the playoff and you see how dominant the really good teams are, I think everybody would go, man, I really didn't want to see 3-loss Washington play Ohio State in week 1. And it's kind of funny that the people that are maybe down on it this year because Alabama and Georgia, it's the same thought really, because they feel like we're going to get to the playoff. They're just going to murder people in week 1 and we're going to end up like 2018 where it was just kind of waiting on Alabama and Clemson to play each other. But I think that does a serious disservice to the fact that, look, making the playoff should be a big deal. The competition to get there, all these wins and losses, all these conversations, who win these championships, even if you assume Alabama and Georgia are a shoe-in to win those playoff games and that they're going to play for the national title, it's still fun as heck to get there. And all those other games matter. I mean, I love every game. Like,
not just making the playoffs, Josh, making a New Year's Six, making a bowl. Like, all of these things should be celebrated. Our hyper focus on the playoff and winning the playoff has kind of ruined everything else.
Yeah, you can see how worked up I'm getting because nothing drives me more insane than this idea that making a New Year's Six bowl or going 12-1 isn't a fun thing and a big accomplishment that's worth celebrating and worth watching. So yeah, as an Ohio State fan, I see.
Yeah. So we do have a super chat.
And I see I get what he's saying now.
Yeah, but I don't want to like twist the knife on an Ohio State fan, but you didn't actually play Joe Burrow because you couldn't beat Clemson that year. But anyway, you can't complain about Jameson Williams doing things at Alabama when you got Olave and Garrett Wilson. I mean, come on. Like, that's like, I don't know. I mean, I feel like he wasn't getting on the field for a reason. And we've seen it in this game. Like, as good as Jameson Williams has been in this game and has been this year, every single game for Alabama this year, he's had a major drop. And look, I mean, when you've got guys like Olave and Wilson ahead of you, and you're fighting for getting on the field, and you're in an offense that features 1 or 2 guys, you can't drop balls.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you, but this goes back to the statement I was having earlier. Like I feel like Ohio State's offense I don't know how much Ohio State fans will take offense to this,
They
is
probably
being limited by the quarterback. If they had one of the high-level quarterbacks this year or one of the ones they've had before, I think they would be absolutely dominant on the offensive side of the ball. If they had Justin Fields this year, they would be dominant. And I think they, I just think CJ Stroud is doing well, but Wilson and Olave are absolute studs. Henderson is an absolute stud. And it's hard to fully appreciate how good they are to have kept Jameson Williams off the field and how good they could really be if they were operating at a high level.
They got to fix targeting. I mean, they just got to.
We're watching the same play. I have a hard time with this one because they haven't blown the whistle and the linemen are trying to drive the play forward. So the guy comes in to clean it up and knock him down. The flag that should have been thrown there actually was a face mask. Like his helmet got ripped off by the safety, but they call targeting.
We've got to fix it. I mean, helmet to helmet is going to happen because that's what people have on their heads is helmets. Like this part, it's just how their bodies move. And to your point, like there's nothing about the targeting penalty as it stands now that would have deterred him from making that play. And that's why, okay, maybe we have a 15-yard penalty there. I still don't like it in this particular play. All three of the targeting calls, including the one for A&M that didn't get called targeting, I think should all have been not been.
Can I raise a point? So they I'm gonna spoil it for you. They say it's not targeting. Okay.
Okay. Late whistle calls.
Don't you kind of hate that this probably should have been a late hit and a face mask, but because of the stupid targeting rule being a complete overturn, this went from ejection 15 yards to absolutely nothing?
Well, and it's all or nothing. Like that's the thing is we need. I think we need three, and we need like a 5, 15, and an ejection. But somebody pointed out like it took forever for them to blow the whistle on this play, and that's a player safety thing. We're going to talk about player safety when a DB leads with his forearms, but kind of grazes the face mask, and we're kicking him out. Holding a guy up and letting him run or not run, just stand there while other guys pound on him is a player safety issue. So maybe we should be ejecting some refs. Okay, so going back to Jameson Williams, would he be a third or fourth best wide receiver at Ohio State? Yeah, I mean, he would be number 3, I think, right now.
Well, Jason Smith and Jigba had theoretically passed him on the depth chart, I think. But they're very different players. So, because Smith and Jigba is more of a possession. He's a big target. Williams is a speed guy, but
Fleming too.
He definitely would have been third or fourth. I think third or fourth.
Well, I think that like his speed is something that you can't teach and you can't coach, but yeah, like look, he's got drops and he's not. Olave and Wilson are dudes. So anyway,
where was this Calzada? Because he just made a throw there to the tight end where he's dealing. He's making reads. He's throwing it to where his receiver can catch it. This guy hasn't existed this year.
No, he's playing out of his mind. And I've had this theory with that too, that these quarterbacks come in against an Alabama or against an elite team and kind of Kellen Mond did it years ago against Clemson, 2 years in a row, where they're just out of their mind because they feel like they've already lost. There's like if they lose, it's not bad, right? If they lose, so what?
Oh man,
Calzada, he's out of his mind.
Yeah, Calzada throws the tying score, but that's an ACL. Look in the way they're checking it. They don't have a backup quarterback, I don't think. Who's their backup? Because King's still out.
King on one foot?
I don't even know. Somebody in the chat, maybe?
Yeah, that is a ligament. Yikes. I just saw the behind. Oh, my goodness. My goodness. After a great throw, a great drive. Oh, man, I hate to see that. Oh.
So if somebody can fill me in on what his backup is, but Yeah, it's a walk-on. They're saying that now. So I can't help but feel like they tied the game, but unless their run game dominates or Alabama screws up kicking in overtime, not outside the realm of possibility.
Oh man, I hate to see
there's
that.
there's no way their offense is going to be able to do anything the rest of this game. They don't have a backup. I keep saying this, but they don't.
Oh,
This is
for this kid. He was having the game of his life. I hate to see this. God.
And this, I mean, you feel like A&M's turning the corner. They have a chance to beat Alabama. Their offense has finally figured things out.
Man, that is tough. That is, and look, like, regardless of what happens this game, they're not going to have a quarterback maybe the rest of the season. They're going to drop some games, and Fisher's going to take some heat for it. But he called a great game tonight and put Calzada in a wonderful position to succeed. This offense has succeeded. I do think Alabama's defense adjusted pretty well in the second half. They gave up this. This is the first touchdown they've given up defensively, but man, this is tough. I'm sick to my stomach. That sucks.
Yeah,
Mike Marino says you got to go for 2. I kind of feel like you do.
Well, no, you don't. It's the same point I made on Twitter. 2-point conversions are heavily rehearsed plays and scripted plays. And the starting quarterback, who was not your starter in fall camp, has probably only had a few weeks to learn them themselves. There is no way that walk-on knows how to run your 2-point plays.
Well, and it's also 3 minutes left in the game. So 2-point play puts you in the lead. But regardless, like the challenge here, I mean, if there's 30 seconds left, I might consider going for 2 because you got nothing to lose.
A&M's chance to win now is a catastrophic turnover or Alabama basically an error in the kicking game. Like they need a turnover or a kicking game miscue because I don't see any way they can go toe-to-toe and score in Alabama, or they can score in 2 minutes. If Alabama scores a touchdown in overtime, if it gets to that, they're not going to be able to match it. The one thing A&M has going for them is Alabama has not been able to score in the red zone to save their lives in this game.
Yeah.
So it could come down to kickers, but yeah.
What's wild about this game is like Alabama's got 38 points and they've probably left 20 points on the board. Like in terms of.
I mean, we talk about offense and defense, right? The problem for Alabama is twofold. One, the defense has given up 38, but the offense also shouldn't have put them in this position to start with. If they don't fumble the ball early, throw a stupid interception.
Yeah.
Oh, and even right now watching this drive, which you'll see, they can't stop shooting themselves in the foot. Like their offense, if they just did the stuff they needed to do, wouldn't have let this be a game. They would have 50-something points in this game.
Well, and that's what I was thinking about earlier tonight. It's like there's going to come a time in the season where Alabama or a Georgia, like an elite team, has the defense not show up. And the offense has got to bail them out. Or the offense doesn't show up and the defense has got to bail them out. Tonight, even with 38 points, it feels like both have failed, equally. And it has not been the best night for Billingsley. Like, it hasn't.
Well, or Bryce Young. He's off. He's missed receivers over and over again in this game, and that's half the story. I don't know how many plays Alabama's had to get a third down conversion or something because they've thrown the ball in the dirt or they've overthrown a guy for a big shot on second down.
Yeah,
Calzada's on the sidelines.
Well, then maybe it's not an ACL. Around.
Yeah, he might have been cleared. They're going to have a chance to win it with 2 minutes in the game.
And this, honestly, this drive has been on Bryce Young. Like they had the chance. He's had 2 open receivers that he's missed. So for all that he's done, and I have a hard time, like you score 38 on the road, you should get the win every time. But if we remember, the defense didn't give up one of those touchdowns. That was special teams, and the special teams scored one of those touchdowns. So Alabama really only scored 31. And in modern football, 31 doesn't necessarily guarantee you a win.
No, no, it doesn't. So
It'll be interesting.
yeah, I mean, here I'm not going to say a lot because this is obviously like the drive of the year so far in college football. A&M managed to tie the game up with 83 yards this half. Calzana's in there with a knee. He seems to be moving well. I don't know how well he is or isn't. Um,
And the thing is,
so
they
here,
only got to get in field goal range. Like, I don't know. Do you know like how good is A&M's kicker?
I'm
Um,
not I'm not sure off the cuff. I don't think it's been particularly good. That's my memory. Is the special teams has not been particularly good. So here's the question for Alabama, and we're seeing this. You're seeing this now, right? If they get negative plays, will Saban actually call a timeout? Like
no, he'll be
the
like,
whole
"What do you
conversation
mean
we were
call a
there.
timeout? I don't want to like no."
Why would I call a
Yeah,
timeout? There's not a delay of game.
yeah. I mean, he's like, we had timeouts on our last drive, and we didn't get a first down. So why would we use our time? Why would we use them? Yeah. So, guys, we're not as engaged in conversation. Like, should we be talking about Notre Dame or Michigan right now? This is like you said, the drive of the year. It's pretty wild.
So that I'm going to tell you, they just had a big play for a first down, and I'll tell you exactly what happened there. Um, Texas A&M has been running man beaters all game because Alabama early on in the game couldn't run zone effectively. They had a big bust where they threw to the corner of the end zone. The guy was wide open. Alabama was in cover 3, and they didn't rotate, so it looked like their guy was in man coverage, and he was supposed to be dropping into a deep third. Ooh, that is actually close. And because of sorry, I'm just watching that replay. This is really high level television.
This is going to be the
It
dead part of our live show that we're going to cut
Right. I
out for the
think he
podcast
caught.
version.
Yeah, I think he caught it. But what they're doing on these plays is they're running rub routes, right? The wide receivers coming in, and he actually picked the linebacker that's supposed to be on Spiller, and they knew they'd have him on the wheel, and they've done that several times. But a large part of it is because Alabama has not been able to mix zone and man because they can't communicate. That's on the coaching staff. That's on the players for not communicating. But I virtually guarantee you that's what's going on. If the other team knows for sure you're going to be man, you can call a play like that and have a pretty good amount of confidence it's going to work.
But here's the thing: like, why is it that Alabama, with the highest paid staff in the nation and every 5-star in the world that they want, can't do this, but Arkansas can, or Mississippi State can? Mississippi State held them to 20 points last week. Like, at some point, there's got to be some sort of coaching indictment, right?
Well,
Like,
I mean, it's a fair question with a narrative of does Alabama's um, does Alabama's pass defense and defensive schemes end up being too complicated for their own good, where they can't get them called? They can't switch man to zone, and they've got so much complication in their pattern match scheme, which is really good come playoff time because it can adapt to a lot of things. But in the middle of the year and early in the year against spread teams, it's repeatedly gotten burned for going on like 8 years now, and it's getting them burned again. So you do have to question if their scheme isn't too complicated and whether they're not doing themselves a massive disservice as a result.
yeah, and I think there's too much evidence of that at this point to assume that it's not worth some level of reasonable indictment. Like, look, Arkansas ain't got more talent than Alabama, and Mississippi State ain't got more talent than Alabama. And it's not that you gave up 24; it's that you gave up 38, maybe 41 in regulation to a team that was offensively dysfunctional. So I do think that, like, at some point, I know that we have said that the Alabama fans that are on the Fire Golding train have been a little bit premature, but at some point you got to say, look, like, this is getting a little crazy.
Yeah, at this point, it's going to come down. I said they couldn't march down, and then Calzada comes out, and you got to give massive props to this dude. I'm not sure how. It doesn't really look like he's that beat up, but he's certainly not 100%. And they're now setting up for a field goal in field goal range. What is this? I'm trying to see where we're at on the field. How long this field goal is going to be. Again, well, I guess I understand Alabama's position not calling timeouts because they'll just move it closer, but they're going to let it come down to a kicker. So you're going to have about a 45-yard field goal unless they get a sack.
They're going to let it come down to the kicker, and honestly, they're pretty bad defense tonight.
Alabama bailing them out. All right, it's coming down here. Yeah,
wow.
So they get the tight end released on the safety, man on man. He just lobs it up, and just an underthrown ball. The safety runs through him. I mean, kind of a weird lob.
Was that catchable?
Yeah, I mean it is. It's just definitely within close enough for the receiver to get to it. Yeah, and he totally runs through him. Totally runs through him from that angle. So they just everything Alabama could do wrong, they've done wrong. This has not been a well played game by them.
This reminds me of 2015 versus Ole Miss. Honestly, like you talk about everything going wrong, and it's not just like going wrong bad luck, which was a lot of 2015 Ole Miss. This is going wrong like they haven't executed, which is really weird for Alabama. But at some point, this is the thing that's crazy. Like the undefeated streak is on the line, and that's what I think is the most impressive thing of the Nick Saban era is the undefeated streak and against unranked opponents. And
about a 75% chance that comes to an end right here. This is a not very long field goal.
95% chance given where they're at.
Yeah, I don't know anything about their kicker.
I imagine he can hit a 20-yarder from dead center.
Yeah.
Famous last words, right?
Yeah, that pass interference totally changed the complexion here.
I think the Calzada run changed a lot too.
Well, yeah, that opened stuff up. So where are we at there? I mean, he's 9 to 10.
And like you said, like this game doesn't put Alabama out for the national championship, but it certainly losing this game means losing this game eliminates their breathing room, but in all honesty, it exposes a lot of things about Alabama, especially defensively, that tells me that they're not a championship caliber team this year. You can't give up 41 points to a pretty anemic offense, a team that scored 10 points against Arkansas 2 weeks ago. You can't do that and expect to win a national championship, because they might win a bunch of games, but this defense is going to show up again down the line.
Yep. Yeah, no, totally. So we're here on chat and we've kind of kept going with you guys to almost midnight, but the undefeated against unranked streak is snapped. The streak of beating his assistant every year is snapped. And I mean, Jimbo Fisher called his shot, said in the offseason, we're going to come down there, we're going to beat them, and he guaranteed it. And they did it. I mean, they came in and they did it. They called everything correctly. They had, every play call they needed to get wins against man coverage. Alabama had no way to adjust. Alabama defensively couldn't stop A&M's run game. Calzada had turned into the kind of player they needed to be a high-level team. And all of a sudden, when that kick man was like hooking and came right back in. And they get the win of the season in college football, probably going to be the game of the season in college football. Back and forth, one of the best games that I've seen in years, and not one that any of us expected. So, if you're an Alabama fan, you're going to be watching this game on repeat on an SEC network for many, many years to come.
I don't think they'll be watching it. They'll be turning the channel.
Yeah.
Honestly, like this, to me, this game was just a failure for Alabama's coaching staff and a great success for Calzada, who played out of his mind. Somebody said, is Alabama's defense elite? I think Alabama's defense is below average, if I'm being entirely honest. I don't think, as bad as we saw Ole Miss's defense today, I don't think Ole Miss has given up 41 to Texas A&M. Do you?
No, I don't think they are. And The reality for Alabama is they're gonna. Everybody's gonna be calling for Pete Golding's head. I don't know that that's necessarily wrong, given how this game went. Now it's one game and they can turn it around, but I go back to something I was saying earlier, right? Bryce Young threw 48 passes in this game. He was 28 of 48, 369 yards, which sounds like a good number, but it was 7.7 yards per attempt. This game was lost in two phases. They had two ways. I'm going to say three ways Alabama could have won the game, or A&M allowed themselves to win it. One, Alabama, if they just hit the throws they had to open receivers, they're going to be in a position to be able to win that game. I don't know how many deep shots they missed. I don't know, like that last drive where they were trying to drive down the field to score to win the game. They had a drop and then, a ball thrown way behind the receiver. Second, Alabama turnovers killed them. Fumble, interception early, really put them in a hole. I always talk about interceptions at the goal line are brutal for your ability to win a game. Like win percentage drops tremendously. And then three, on the defensive side of the ball, that's where you've got to really tip your hat to Texas A&M and what they did, because I don't feel like Alabama played a good game defensively, especially early, right? I think A&M had like 150 yards in the second half, but they gave up like 300 in the first half. But despite that had a lot to do with what Texas A&M has a lot to do with how good of a back Isaiah Spiller is, how good of a back A-Chain is. Calzada played very efficiently, didn't miss many throws, made a lot of good reads. When they had a guy open, they saw it and hit it in a way Alabama didn't do. And they executed offensively at a level that I just hadn't seen them do. So I also think you have to give a lot of credit to Texas A&M and the massive strides they took forward offensively just to be able to take the plays that were in front of them and capitalize to put up 41 points.
Yeah, and I think that, look, everybody's going to maybe – I don't know how you overreact to this, given that you gave up 41 points to a pretty pedestrian offense. And look, like Jimbo Fisher's never scored 41 points on Alabama with Kellen Mond. Like Calzada, it's not Calzada, it's the offensive line. The offensive line stonewalled the Alabama defensive line. Now, they did make adjustments in the second half. They only gave up the one touchdown late and then the field goal. So they gave up 10 points defensively in the second half. We're not going to talk about the special teams, score doesn't really count in that regard, but they were absolutely manhandled in the first half, which tells me, yeah, you made great adjustments, but your game plan coming in was absolutely trash. And to your point earlier, it's almost like you're not letting your players play and you're just overcomplicating everything. And it's been years and years of this. And I just think that I have defended Golding to Alabama fans for years now, and I'm to the point where I'm like, look, like I see Arkansas stonewalling A&M, Mississippi State. These guys have far inferior talent. I can no longer defend Pete Golding to Alabama fans. Can you?
No. I think schematically they do some things that are really good. They kind of innovated a little bit in the way they cover backs and tight ends out of the backfield in theory. The problem is their execution's not there. And at some point, good defensive coordinators consistently produce defenses that execute on a good level. I've never seen a Barry Odom defense that can't tackle. I've never seen a Brett Venables defense that can't tackle. I've seen multiple Pete Golding defenses that can't tackle.
Right.
And at some point, you've got roster turnover and you finally get an experienced defense and they do it again, that's on you. And that's a problem you have. Michigan pulled it out against Nebraska. We haven't really tracked all this stuff too much because we've been so busy watching the other one. But that's where it is. And so let's do this, right? I'm getting pretty tired. I know you are too. Do you want to try to conclude with a quick top 10? And if you would, because we'll cut it up, please lead with the fact that this is done immediately after the Alabama A&M game, and we're doing on minimal sleep and minimal thought. But let's just try to bang one out.
So obviously I got Alabama number one
in the chat.
I had Georgia number one last week, so I'm okay with that. So hold on, y'all. Let me pull this up real quick. Please apologize. I apologize for not having this already. I didn't know that Josh was going to ask me to do a top 10 right after Alabama lost for the first time ever to an unranked opponent since 2007.
Would you guys, let's put this in the chat right now, okay? It'll take about 30 seconds. Would you guys rather us do a top 10, or would you rather us talk more about the Alabama loss to A&M? Because we've been talking about it live on here for a while, and I don't know how much more you guys want to hear about it. But if you want us to talk about that instead of a top 10, let us know.
I can't do a top 10 right now. I just looked at it. I can't do it. Let's do a review of this game that we can cut up. Just because I mentally cannot do it. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, it's fine by me.
All right. Okay, so Josh, I think in the first half, if we're going to review what happened in Alabama A&M, the first half was miscues Alabama offense, but really both sides of the line getting dominated. There were adjustments in the second half, but was it too little too late, or was it something else?
I'll tell you, you're being heavily outvoted in the chat section. So I made you a top 10 without you if need be.
Okay.
But
okay. Look, I'm getting outvoted. I'll do a top 10. You start and I'll do a top 10 because I trust the chat. I'm gonna go with the chat.
All right. So let's do this. I'm gonna walk through my top 10, 1 to 10. And if you're watching this on a replay, I'll say the Alabama A&M game just ended. We're exhausted. It's midnight. Haven't had a chance to rewatch anything, but this is our off the cuff top 10, and this is where we see teams falling. So I'm going to give my entire top 10 to give Daniel a chance to try and catch up here. Number 1 for me is obvious, and that's Georgia. Georgia beat Auburn in resounding fashion. I don't know how good Auburn is or isn't, but I don't think they're any worse than Texas A&M. And they won that game handily where Alabama could not. So they're a clear number 1 to me. Number 2 at this point has to be Iowa. I've got my doubts on Iowa offensively. I think given their offensive production, and I don't care how many turnovers you produce or how good your defense is, there's going to be a game where you have some hiccups or you bust a couple coverages, they hit a couple plays, make a couple clutch catches. You're going to give up 25 to 30 points. I'm not sure if Iowa wins that game. But what they have accomplished this year, they're undefeated, and there are not many teams that can say that. So I would have Iowa number 2. Number 3 for me right now, I'm actually going to go Ohio State. I think they've turned the corner offensively. I think they look like the team, or at least a lot more like the team we thought they would be. They handled business against Maryland. They're balanced on both sides of the ball. I know Ohio State and Oregon both have a loss. Oregon has the head-to-head, but Oregon's loss is a lot worse than Ohio State's loss. It's kind of weird to evaluate when you're not in the same conference, and that's why I would have Ohio State number 3. Number 4 for me, this is honestly where it starts to get pretty hard. I'm actually going to put Oklahoma in the 4 spot because of how much better they looked with consistent quarterback play and the fact that they managed to stay undefeated when, again, a lot of teams aren't. They've done that with good level production, and I think they're going to be a very different team going forward. I think it makes sense to have them sitting there at number 4. Number 5 for me would be, I'm going to say at that point, that's where I'm going to slot in Alabama. It's really them and Cincinnati. Cincinnati's number 6. And I'll say that trying to dissect those 2 teams is really hard. I don't have a ton of respect for Cincinnati's schedule. Alabama did beat Ole Miss, who's a very good team. They did beat Florida on the road, who's a very good team. This is a bad loss, but it's a loss that's based off playing a lot more teams than Cincinnati is going to have to play that are solid teams. And so that's why I have them 5, Cincinnati number 6. After that, Ole Miss, I still have to have them behind Alabama. I think that's fair. I won't put them ahead of Cincinnati, but I'm going to have them number 7. I kind of flip-flopped Ole Miss and Cincinnati, and you can 5 through 7 right now are a little bit of a crapshoot. But Ole Miss takes care of business again against Arkansas. I think they're a genuinely dangerous team. Number 8, I'm going to say Oregon. Oregon slides up a little bit because of teams that lost. Last week, I had Penn State up there. I've got to slot them down. They're a little more like what I thought they were. And, Oregon's loss is not really any worse than or any better than Alabama's loss. Yes, they beat Ohio State, but otherwise they haven't looked as good. That's why they're at where they are. I think I'm on 9, and that for me would be Kentucky. Kentucky's undefeated. They whipped LSU. They look like a really good football team. They've beaten Florida. They're undefeated. I don't know how you can not have them up there. And then 10 for me, and rounding it out is I think I'm going to say Michigan. And it's pretty simple. Michigan stayed undefeated. You have, as I said, how will you do against their schedule? How will they do against yours? Michigan hasn't played a tough schedule, but they are undefeated. They did win the game against Nebraska. Penn State did lose. And I do play a game in my head that I almost want to put Penn State ahead of Michigan. I don't know how much I want to punish them for losing to Iowa. And I'm almost regretting not having Penn State ahead of Michigan right now, because I don't know that I would pick Michigan to beat Iowa. But we don't know how good Nebraska is or isn't. I think it's entirely possible that Nebraska is rounding into a good team. And given that, I think it makes sense to have Michigan number 10. So for me, that's my top 10. I bought you a lot of time. What's your top 10?
All right. And someone said, I know who Josh is, who's the guy who always hates on Michigan. Look, Michigan, be good, and I won't have to keep it real with Michigan. I'm going to run through my top 10 and make everybody mad, but I'm going to explain it. Georgia number 1. I had Georgia number 1 last week. Alabama's defense against Ole Miss concerned me a little bit. Look, I think holding Ole Miss to 21 points is actually pretty good for Alabama, but we saw tonight that my concerns were validated. Josh, I've got Ohio State at number 2, and it's really because I think of, like, what would Ohio State do with everybody else's schedule to this point, and what would Ohio State do right now if they played other teams? And right now, I'm actually impressed with them handling their business, and I love that roster. Number 3, and this is where everybody will get really mad at me, and I really don't care. I've got Alabama number 3. Alabama had a really bad game tonight, really a bad first half. They gave up 10 second half points. They figured a lot of things out defensively in the second half. And look, I don't know that Alabama is super great this year. I don't know that anybody is super great this year. But if you're honestly going to tell me, because I've got Iowa number 4, that Iowa on a neutral field is favored against Alabama, you are absolutely kidding yourself. Iowa caught a break. They get credit for it. They caught a break in Penn State's quarterback getting hurt. Clifford got hurt. Iowa has not looked good offensively all year. They're not beating Alabama. I'm sorry. They're just not.
And I'm going to interject, because I'm seeing a lot of super chats while we do this about how the Penn State loss was better than Bama, and I think that's going to be the retort. But let's be clear, there's who has the worst loss and who has the better win, and it's the same problem with Oregon. Alabama did beat Ole Miss handily, who is a good team. They did beat Florida, who is a pretty darn good team on the road. What is Penn State's best win right now? Auburn at home?
And Auburn's team that lost 34-10 today to Georgia,
and Auburn's probably not going to stay ranked. I don't think Auburn's particularly good. So it's definitely a worse loss, best win kind of deal. And I think your point is that Alabama's best wins are probably as good or better than anyone else in college football at this point. And
keep in
that
mind,
balances the loss.
That Penn State's bad loss would have been at Wisconsin if they didn't have a goal line interception. Iowa number 4, I think they deserve credit for their wins to this point, but I don't give credit just for having a clean record. I don't think Iowa would be undefeated right now with Alabama's schedule. That's not saying they couldn't beat Texas A&M, but I don't think they go Florida, Ole Miss, A&M all in a row and come out of that unscathed. I've got Oklahoma number 5. I think they would beat Cincinnati, who I have at number 6. I don't love the defense today, but I also do love that they found something a little bit, I think, at quarterback. This one's going to surprise a lot of people, and I'm going to defend this pick. I've got Ole Miss at number 7, and they just beat Arkansas by 1 point, and they gave up 7,000 points. The thing is, when I look at this list of top 10 teams or top however many teams, I think Georgia has an elite defense. I think
You lost your
Alabama.
You lost your video feed, by the way, but continue.
Okay. I'm going to keep talking. My battery just died. Georgia has an elite defense. Alabama has a elite minus offense. Ole Miss has an elite offense. They just do. And there's not a lot of teams on this list that have an elite unit on either side of the ball. So that's why I've got Ole Miss at number 7. I think on any given day, they could beat any one of these teams. Penn State at number 8. I'm not going to dump them too far because I think Clifford, a healthy Clifford, they win that game. So I don't want to penalize them too much, and I want to keep them still within striking distance of the playoffs. Michigan number 9, and I don't feel great about it because we've now got 2 data points on them struggling with what I think are mediocre or not good teams with Rutgers and Nebraska, but they are undefeated and they deserve credit. Kentucky number 10, who I think is actually a good team, who will lose to Georgia, but they are a good team. And it reminds me of the Kentucky team a few years ago that won 10 games that everybody made fun of because we were high on. And they were like, oh, you're SEC homers. And they went out and beat Penn State, who was the second best team in the Big Ten that year. And then we heard nothing about it after. Like everybody went silent that was making fun of us. I think Kentucky is a legitimate team this year who is very flawed on one side of the ball, but very good, not elite, on the other side of the ball. That's my top 10. And now we can talk about something else.
Yeah, I don't have much more to say, man. Heck of a win for Texas
just tell me,
A&M.
just in a reaction, like Alabama at number 3, do you think I'm crazy? Ole Miss at number 7, do you think I'm crazy?
I don't think you're crazy, just because there aren't many clear-cut good options. And Alabama has won games that not a lot of other teams would win with any consistency. They lost to a Texas A&M team that I still don't buy as great. We'll see. I've seen a lot of guys against Alabama's man coverage scheme look like world beaters and not play like that ever again. So we'll see if A&M turns the corner, and maybe it turns out they do. But we're also going to have to see if Alabama's defense really does have problems, how they turn things around, if they end up being a different team. That 2015 Ole Miss game you're talking about, they were shaky. The defense looked bad. They were really inconsistent, and then they became a completely different team after that wake-up call. But from Ole Miss's perspective, beating Arkansas is a big deal. I mean, playing the way they play is tough, and I think they beat most teams in college football right now. Their defense is, I don't think it's good, but it's not terrible, and the offense is extremely good and explosive. They can run the ball, they can throw the ball, and there aren't that many teams from like 6 on that are great. So I don't think I don't really have any issue with a 1-loss Ole Miss team being at that spot. I think I don't know why they aren't higher ranked than they are when you look at the teams. Let me look at right now the top 25 rankings. Ole Miss going into this week was 17th. I mean, they're behind Kentucky, behind a Coastal Carolina team that hasn't played anybody. They were behind Arkansas. They're behind Michigan. They're behind Oregon, which I get Oregon's win. But do you think Notre Dame would actually beat Ole Miss? Because I don't think they would. I don't think they beat Ole Miss. Like maybe I don't know that they beat them 2 and 5 times. Like Ole Miss wins that game more often than not, and especially right now they've got a more impressive resume. So.
Yeah, I am saying right now that Ole Miss is better than Penn State or Michigan on a neutral field. Michigan beat Rutgers by 7 points 2 weeks ago. They beat Nebraska by however many points tonight. Ole Miss murders Rutgers or Nebraska. So, look, Michigan has a clean 0 in the loss column. If anybody thinks Michigan would beat Alabama right now, please let me know how many points you would take, and let's hope they meet up somewhere because Alabama would murder Michigan. I think people are going to overreact to this Alabama loss. I dumped Alabama to second last week because I think that there are some concerns on the defensive side of the ball. But remember, neutral field. Like Alabama struggled at Florida and won. They struggled at Texas A&M and lost, on the last second field goal. They had everything go wrong for them tonight. Part of it, their own doing. Are you totally sure that happens on a neutral field against a Michigan or against a Penn State? No. And Penn State fans who beat Auburn by 1 score at home are you totally sure that when Alabama plays Auburn later this year, they don't do something to them like Georgia did? I'm just not sure.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. There's a lot left to be proven, and there are not a lot of data points to show it. So we'll see how the year goes. I think in the top 25, Alabama's going to drop quite a bit due to this loss. I think they're going to be very happy to drop them behind all the undefeated teams to something like, something around 6 or 7. Yeah, maybe even behind Ohio State. But it's going to be lip service. And if Alabama turns it around and starts playing better football, they'll be more than happy to climb them back up. And again, what this really does for Alabama is it means that they don't get the mulligan against Georgia. They probably need, they got to beat Georgia now. Probably have to beat Georgia. A lot of stuff can still happen, but they probably have to beat Georgia in the SEC championship to make the playoff. But beyond that, their goals are still in front of them, so they're going to be able to, they've got every opportunity to circle the wagon, so to speak.
Josh, and we're both running out of steam pretty quickly. I want to end on this, Josh. I'll let you kind of take this one. I caught this, and I hate it because we've got a pretty hot chat right now and a lot of people watching, but it is late for us. A lot of y'all were watching the Alabama A&M game, and we started at halftime, so we're pretty tired. Somebody said, if Alabama doesn't drop out of the top 4, I'm done with CFB, college football. Is that not ridiculous, given that, like, the flaws we've seen of everybody this year, including in a little bit part Georgia, to assume that Alabama falling out is not one of the top 4 teams in the country? Like, gun to your head, your mortgage on the line, if you got to bet it. Are you really going to say that there are 4 teams actually better than Alabama right now?
Well, I mean, I can tell you right now they will drop out of the top 4. Cincinnati and Oklahoma are going to move up. Penn State will fall out. I think Alabama will stay ahead of Penn State. The question is whether they'll stay ahead of Ohio State. But every year is relative. We say this a million times. People are going to say Alabama's not a top whatever team. They lost to Texas A&M. That is going to be the refrain for the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever. You're ranked relative to everybody that's out there in college football. This year, there are not many high-level teams out there. If you want to, people say like, well, X team isn't a top 10 team. Y team isn't a. Do you know how many top 10 teams there are this year? There's like 5. Okay. You know how many top 5 teams there are? Maybe one. It may just be Georgia. They may be the only team you think of as a top 5 team. So you've got to put somebody 4th and 5th and 6th and 7th and 8th. And, that Ohio State loss to Oregon is really not great. And Ohio State has had weak competition. That Alabama loss to A&M is really not great. And they've won some good games. But that A&M game is really not a great loss. Penn State's loss to Iowa looks pretty good, but they don't really have a great win on the resume, as it turns out. Cincinnati's schedule is a lot weaker than it was anticipated being. Oregon has a bad loss, a great win against Ohio State, but has not looked good after that. Michigan hasn't played great competition and hasn't looked great against it. I could go on and on and on. There is an argument against anyone being at any spot other than number 1 this year. And the AP poll is going to rank off wins and losses unless there's a huge schedule disparity, pretty consistent in how they do that. The playoff committee will be a lot more receptive to the idea that like Alabama's schedule is far harder than Cincinnati's schedule or Ohio State's schedule is far harder. They're not going to I don't think they'd have Cincinnati ahead of Ohio State right now. I don't think they would. I think they'd have Ohio State ahead of Cincinnati. But the AP poll is not going to do that. So one, remember the AP poll doesn't matter, but it's going to stay wins and loss. The question is, where are these teams when the playoff committee starts ranking it? And then, the quality of the schedules, the out of conference games, the dominance, all that is going to be a much larger factor. But we're still, I want to say 2 or 3 weeks away from that, right?
Yeah, and people are saying, like, look, I don't care where the AP puts Alabama. I don't care where y'all in the chat want to put Alabama. I'm ranking teams based on how good I think they are. And I don't, like someone said, and I'm gonna go out with this, but someone said you got to reward somebody for winning games. I don't have to reward Michigan for beating Rutgers by 7 on a weekend where Alabama beat Ole Miss by 3 touchdowns. I mean, we have been conditioned, because this is how AP voters vote, to think, to hyper react to this week's information. And everybody's going to call me an Alabama fan or whatever. I'm just telling you right now, like, everybody's saying, who is Alabama beat? And somebody pointed out that they played Mercer. Okay, but they played Florida, Ole Miss, and A&M in a row. And look, if you think that barely beating Rutgers and barely beating Nebraska is better than that, then great. Put Michigan ahead of Alabama. But if somebody put a gun to your head, you're picking Alabama. And that's what I'm doing right now, is I'm just like, it's not popular. The popular thing in our chat would say, yeah, man, Alabama's done, Renaissance season, which it is. And let's be excited about the fact that Alabama's not the juggernaut in the room still. They are. And that, I hate to say that, because it's not fun. And that's putting, that's raining on the parade a little bit. But I'm also going to be honest to what I think. And what I think is, if Alabama played Michigan or Penn State tomorrow in a neutral field, they beat them by 3 touchdowns. That's what I think.
So, and I'll give my closing thoughts. Somebody said in the chat, in 2015, Alabama lost to Ole Miss in a game that in a lot of ways resembled the one we just saw, and everybody literally said the dynasty's over. Hugh Freeze is going to be the next it coach in the SEC, and they turned around and won the national title. It's way too early to overreact one way or the other. I do think that they're going to end up being a much better team than they look this week. And there is a huge difference in my mind from what I've seen from Alabama and what I've seen from Clemson that went unranked, right? There's a reason Clemson fell out, which is that they're not a particularly good team. Really, really good defense. The offense is a disaster. Alabama had a really bad game. And it's the second time I would say they've had a bad game. I thought the Florida game was also a bad game for them. And their offense has been pretty inconsistent throughout the year. But they have been, for the most part, good. They have won games up to this point, and not everyone can say that. And they're going to fall, and then they're going to climb back is probably what's going to happen. And you're going to have to put them away, because the truth is Alabama's not done. As much as, we're all tired of seeing Alabama at the top of college football year after
Right.
year. They're not done just because you want them to be. And, it took Clemson a couple losses to get knocked out. It's going to take Alabama a couple losses, or Ohio State. One loss will not knock Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, Oklahoma out of the playoffs. If they finish with one loss, pretty much every one of those teams is going to end up in. If it's Oklahoma, Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia, and they're all one-loss teams, which means Alabama beats Georgia in the SEC championship, those are your playoff teams. If you don't want those 4, you need 2 losses. And the reason for that is they beat a lot of other teams to get there, and they are that much better than everybody else in their conference generally, or look that way. So that's just where we are, and we've got to accept it. But it does mean Alabama has 0 margin for error in the same way Clemson did.
And M. Goboski said that Alabama could go 6-6, and you still rank them over Michigan. Alabama hasn't gone 6-6 since like 2007. So look, and this is what I'm going to go out with. The difference in our channel, and why people have a hard time with our channel, Josh, is we scrutinize wins as much as we scrutinize losses. I dropped Alabama in a 3-touchdown win over Ole Miss to number 2 last week because I saw some things that concerned me. I'm not going to wave a banner because you beat Rutgers by 1 touchdown when other people are beating them by 50 points. I'm just not. Equally, I'm not going to overreact to Ohio State murdering a Maryland team that's not very good. But I'm also not going to underreact to Alabama's defense 2 weeks in a row, giving me concerns. Everybody's flawed this year. And look, like, I'm excited for this season. I think Alabama losing is actually good for college football right now. I am excited for what we've seen so far this season. I don't think Georgia's unbeatable, which will make the playoffs interesting. Give me one final parting shot, and then we're going to all get to bed.
So, yeah, one final parting shot. It will be interesting to see if Calzada can maintain that level of composure and play at a higher level. Already having 2 losses is devastating for A&M because they beat Alabama, which means they should have been in the driver's seat. If they had beaten Mississippi State, they would be in the driver's seat for the SEC West. So people realize that. But because they lost that game against Mississippi State, they now need Alabama to drop a second game. But still, A&M could very easily go 10-2. I don't know that Auburn's a great team. It'll be interesting to see how they do against Ole Miss. LSU's not a great team, so Missouri's bad, South Carolina's bad, LSU's bad. I think it's like Prairie View State. Their whole schedule left is Auburn and Ole Miss, and all of a sudden a team that we were all writing off as unranked, oddly enough, could actually end up being one of Alabama's better wins because they may end up 10-2 and a top 10 team by the time all this is over, and that Mississippi State game could be an aberration. So that's the final one. Give credit for A&M and realize they're not out of the SEC hunt. If Alabama drops another game, they're in the SEC championship. Technically, probably not even out of the national title hunt, and have every chance now to end up salvaging what a lot of people thought was a disaster season once King went down.
All right, Al, that is it for us tonight. I'm exhausted, and I know Josh is too. This has been a lot of fun. This has been, I think, maybe our most watched eventually chat. Sorry, my video went out, but y'all have a great weekend. We got some content coming out on Monday, and probably this top 10 if I can find it as a cut up. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.